Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, April 3rd. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Asa Winstanley, Jon Elmer, and Tamara Nasser. It's day 180 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. We have another packed show for you today, including a discussion with our contributor Abubaker Abed in Gaza. We'll also be joined by Canada-based Dr. Yipeng Ge to talk about his recent medical delegation to Gaza. Our colleague David Cronin will join us to talk about why he was censored by a Dutch university, and later on in the program, of course, a full roundup of videos from the Palestinian armed resistance with Jon Elmer. But first, some of the news that we've been covering at the Electronic Intifada. On Monday morning, the Israeli army withdrew after 2 continuous weeks of attacking, besieging, and destroying the entire al-Shifa medical complex in Gaza City. During its siege on al-Shifa Hospital, the largest medical facility in the Gaza Strip, Israel destroyed, quote, all buildings and departments without exception in a clear crime that shames humanity, according to the Gaza government media office. The army faced fierce battles from Palestinian resistance factions, some of which we'll get into with Jon later on in the program. When the families of patients, medical staff, and displaced persons who were trapped inside the hospital and its grounds during Israel's raid and massacres returned to retrieve their loved ones, many found bodies in fragments flattened under bulldozer treads. Children's corpses were discovered burned beyond recognition. The Gaza government media office added that, quote, inside the complex and its surroundings, the occupation army killed more than 400 martyrs and attempted to hide its abominable crime by executing hundreds of civilians, the wounded and the sick within the walls of the al-Shifa medical complex. They covered the bodies with piles of sand, bulldozed them, buried them, and mixed them with the ground of the complex. Moreover, more than 300 prisoners were arrested, while over 100 Palestinian civilians are still missing as a result of the occupation's shocking crime. Hundreds of bodies inside al-Shifa complex and in the surrounding area were found burned and mutilated, including corpses, quote, with their heads and limbs severed, stated the Geneva-based Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor. The group called Israel's destruction and slaughter at al-Shifa one of the largest massacres in Palestinian history. Physicians were executed, and more than 20 patients were found dead in their hospital beds, quote, as a result of the Israeli siege of the complex and the deliberate deprivation by Israeli soldiers of medical care, food, and water, Euromed stated on Monday. Israeli lawmakers and political figures have repeated claims that the hospital complex was used as a Hamas and Islamic Jihad command center. Naftali Bennett, Israel's former prime minister, called the destruction of al-Shifa a quote, amazing battlefield achievement. Hamas used staff and patients as human shields in order to cause maximum civilian casualties as to create more criticism and pressure on Israel, Bennett claimed, adding that, quote, not one civilian was killed, not one. Israel's military chief of staff, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 boasted on Saturday that the army's siege of al-Shifa sends, quote, a very, very important message here. A hospital is not a safe place. Physicians from al-Shifa held a press conference on Monday on the ruins of the hospital grounds. Here's the head of the nursing department, Dr. Jadala Sahafi, speaking to Al Jazeera.
With deep regret, we have come to see this shocking scene at al-Shifa medical complex. The scale of deliberate destruction and willful annihilation of the facilities and the infrastructure by the Israelis are beyond description. What we have witnessed is nothing compared to what we have seen. It is a deliberate act against Gaza's symbol, al-Shifa medical complex, the largest in the Gaza Strip, catering to more than 2,000 patients and performing more than 100 surgical operations in a single day. It is now a total wreck. The Israelis are purposefully ruining Gaza's entire health sector.
ما شاهدناه من حصار الطواقم الطبية ومن
Patients and medical staff were besieged for more than 15 days without the basic necessities for life, let alone medical supplies. Dead bodies decomposed, reeking and bloated. There were worms crawling out of them. In addition to the forcible expulsion of patients and displaced civilians sheltering within the compound. It is a full-fledged war crime by the Israelis. About 30 medical staff are not accounted for, and we do not know what has become of them. Were they executed or detained? We call on the International Red Cross and all international organizations to help us locate their whereabouts.
That was Dr. Jadala Sahafi, the head of al-Shifa Hospital's nursing department, speaking to Al Jazeera on Monday. Doa Shaheen, writing in the Electronic Intifada, reported that a man named Salim Baraka saw, quote, the kind of horror no parent should ever have to endure. The Israeli military killed his son Karim right in front of him. Shaheen writes, quote, like so many others, Salim and Karim fled from their home in Jabalia refugee camp, northern Gaza, during the current genocidal war. They took shelter at al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital. They were inside the hospital when it was stormed by Israeli forces on March 18th. Salim recalled how he spent the following week, quote, waiting to die. Quote, quadcopter drones were firing wildly, striking anything that moved, he said. The Israelis smashed the glass in the windows and destroyed the walls in the department where we were hiding. A shell fell on us and killed my son in front of my eyes, he added. I could not save him. He bled to death. The situation, in Salim's words, was, quote, worse than hell. For much more, read Doa Shaheen's feature, Siege of Gaza's Largest Hospital, Worse Than Hell, and my post, al-Shifa Hospital in Ruins, on electronicintifada.net. The day before it withdrew from al-Shifa, the Israeli army bombed tents housing displaced persons and journalists in the courtyard of the Al-Aqsa hospital in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. At least 4 people were killed and 17 others were wounded in the Israeli airstrike. Hind Khureri, who has contributed to the Electronic Intifada and works as a reporter for Al Jazeera, was inside one of the tents for working journalists. She told the network that, quote, everyone is terrified here. They have been seeking refuge inside this hospital for more than 6 months now, she said. Last week, the Switzerland-based Insecurity Insight Research Institution reported that there have now been more than 1,000 recorded attacks on healthcare in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip since October 7th. 785 attacks on healthcare facilities were reported over the last 6 months of Israel's genocide in Gaza, the group stated, while 175 attacks were on facilities in the West Bank. Most of these attacks involved airstrikes, damaging or destroying hospitals and clinics and killing health workers. Insecurity Insight stated that the Israeli army's, quote, unrelenting aerial attack on the Strip has had a catastrophic and far-reaching impact on the population and the healthcare system. Over the weekend, the International Court of Justice issued new provisional measures stating that Israel must take all necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay and in full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provision at scale by all concerned of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance to Palestinians throughout the Gaza Strip. Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated that, quote, the fresh ICJ order observes that Palestinians in Gaza are no longer facing only the risk of famine, but that famine is setting in, and that the pre-January catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Strip has further deteriorated. The court says that its earlier orders, which it issued on January 26th, did not fully address the consequences arising from the changes in the situation in Gaza. According to the ICJ's new order, Israel must ensure the unhindered provision at scale of basic services and humanitarian assistance, including food, water, fuel, shelter, clothing, hygiene, and sanitation requirements, and medical supplies, plus increase the capacity and number of land crossing points and keep them open for as long as necessary, Euromed Human Rights Monitor said. However, Israel's engineered starvation of Palestinians in Gaza remains in full swing, and the army has not stopped targeting people awaiting aid, It has not stopped blocking the aid, and it has not stopped targeting aid workers. Overnight on Tuesday, as Tamara Nasser reported, the Israeli Air Force struck a convoy of aid workers in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza, killing 7 members of the US-based World Central Kitchen charity. An Israeli Elbit Hermes 450 drone, quote, fired 3 missiles, one after the other, according to the Tel Aviv newspaper Haaretz, from unnamed defense sources privy to the details of the attack. The aid team, quote, was traveling in a deconflicted zone in 2 armored cars branded with the World Central Kitchen logo and a soft-skin vehicle, World Central Kitchen said. Graphic images depicting the corpses of aid workers clad in bulletproof vests bearing the logo of World Central Kitchen circulated on social media, Tamara writes. She adds that the World Central Kitchen announced the immediate suspension of all of its operations in the region. Ships that had already set sail from Cyprus as part of the charity's operations were reportedly turning back. ANERA, a U.S. charity providing humanitarian aid to Palestinians, also announced a pause in its operations in Gaza. It was the second largest humanitarian aid group in the Gaza Strip after the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, or UNRWA. ANERA said that, quote, the unprecedented scale of the current conflict and the disregard for international law necessitate this historic pause in our operations. The Gaza Logistics and Support Coordinator for the group, Musa Shawa, was also killed in an Israeli strike on Deir al-Balah last month. Israel's military chief of staff, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 said that, quote, the strike on World Central Kitchen was not carried out with the intention of harming aid workers. He added, it was a mistake that followed a misidentification at night during a war in very complex conditions. It shouldn't have happened. John Kirby, the U.S. State Department spokesperson, said, quote, there's no evidence that the Israeli army killing of World Central Kitchen staff was deliberate.
Presumes at this very early hour that it was a deliberate strike, that they knew exactly what they were hitting, that they were hitting aid workers and did it on purpose, and there's no evidence of that. I would also remind you, sir, that we continue to look at incidents as they occur. The State Department has a process in place. And to date, as you and I are speaking, they have not found any incidents where the Israelis have violated international humanitarian law. And lest you think we don't take it seriously, I can assure you that we do. We look at this in real time.
They have never violated international humanitarian law ever in the past 5 to 6 months.
I'm telling you, the State Department has looked at incidents in the past and has yet to determine that any of those incidents violate international humanitarian law. Okay, go ahead.
That was John Kirby of the U.S. State Department. In her report, Tamara Nasser explains that, quote, Israel's genocide in the Gaza Strip over the last 6 months has been marred by attempts to whitewash the man-made catastrophe with humanitarian gestures. The latest face of this effort has been the World Central Kitchen, which describes itself as, quote, first to the front lines, providing meals in response to humanitarian, climate, and community crises. The only reason the World Central Kitchen has been able to deliver aid into Gaza by boat is because the genocidaires of Gaza have given them the green light and safe passage to do so, Tamara notes. The New York Times reported that, quote, every step was carried out with permission from the Israeli military when it spoke to the charity's director of emergency response. Tamara writes that, quote, there remains no technical reason why aid trucks should not be able to enter Gaza by land. It is the most efficient, cost-effective, and safe method of delivering aid to Gaza, and aid trucks remain stuck at the Rafah crossing, with Egypt unable to enter Gaza because Israel won't let them in. Washington refuses to use any of its enormous leverage to compel Tel Aviv to do so, or to end the siege on Gaza altogether. The construction of a temporary pier and the dropping of aid packages from the sky are political gestures aimed at maneuvering and establishing political realities on the ground. For much more on this story, read my colleague Tamara Nasser's latest report, Aid to Gaza, Suspended After Israel Murders World Central Kitchen Workers, on electronicintifada.net. And we'll also be discussing the World Central Kitchen story later on in this program. And finally, the Biden administration is urging members of Congress to approve the sale of up to 50 F-15 fighter jets to the Israeli military in a deal worth more than $18 billion. CNN reported that the arms deal, quote, which would amount to the largest U.S. foreign military sale to Israel since October 7th, comes as the administration is also expected to notify Congress soon of a large new sale of precision-guided munition kits to Israel, according to CNN's sources. And that's just some of the news from on the ground in Palestine over the last few days. Please go to electronicintifada.net to read some of our crucial new features by writers in Gaza, now up on our homepage. And you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman. Coming up, we'll have Dr. Yipeng Ge on to talk about the health catastrophe in Gaza. Our colleague David Cronin will talk about why he was censored by a Dutch university. And we'll get a full update from Jon Elmer on the latest military developments in Gaza. But first, Ali Abunimah and I are delighted to be joined once again by our contributor, Abubaker Abed. Live and direct from Gaza. Is Abubaker here? Oh, you're muted, Ali.
We're still trying to connect with him. I think it's
Okay.
going to be a couple of minutes. We're hopeful that we're going to get Abubaker. But Nora, that was a very tough news roundup as usual.
Yeah.
And it just feels like the past few days, things are just escalating worse and worse. It's difficult to keep track of. I mean, it already seems like a year since we were talking about the horrors at al-Shifa, and it's just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And now you have the murder of the World Central Kitchen staff. I think we're going to come back to that later in the show because there's a lot of questions about it, but there's no question whatsoever that Israel murdered these people. And, you know, even if we have, I think, legitimate questions about the role of World Central Kitchen in Gaza, certainly there's no justification for the murder of individuals who, by all accounts, you know, some of them, of the people who were killed, have long-standing records as humanitarian workers. And of course, one of the staff killed, one of the 7 people killed, is a Palestinian. So it's just horror after horror.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, it was quite a day, Monday, and then overnight on Tuesday, the withdrawal of the Israeli army from Shifa after a 2-week siege, seeing the carnage that Israel had left behind, seeing these photographs, you know, that I didn't want to put in the news report because they're too gruesome, but just the aftermath of Israel's slaughter. I mean, they turned Shifa into a slaughterhouse. And the grounds around it. Yeah.
It barely makes an impact anymore. I mean, this is.
Yeah, I don't know if it was even, you know, properly covered.
Yeah, if you remember back in October, the massacre at the al-Ahli hospital.
Right.
You know, and that was a big international story. And they raised questions about, was it really Israel who did this? There was the, you know, completely implausible theory that a rocket from a resistance group had killed dozens or hundreds of people. And, you know, that was a big story then. Now literally every hospital has been taken out of service. And we're going to hear from Dr. Yipeng Ge, who was in Gaza. One thing I should say, actually, speaking of the work of doctors going to Gaza, is yesterday, so that was Tuesday evening, the White House attempted to hold an iftar, iftar meal with Muslims. And, you know, there's been, by the way, I checked this, little quiz here, Nora. Who hosted more White House iftars as president, Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
I'm going to say Trump.
Yeah, it was Donald Trump. In fact, Joe Biden has never held a White House iftar. He has had, and partly that, you know, you could say that was due to the pandemic, but the past 2 years he's held like an Eid al-Fitr reception. So a reception for the Eid at the end of Ramadan, but not a White House iftar. And they attempted to hold one yesterday, and it was apparently a disaster.
Yeah.
It was going, according to the press reporting, there was only supposed to be about a dozen people there anyway, because, and probably some of them are White House staff. Yeah. And because apparently most people who are invited refused to show up. Some people did agree to go and apparently left in protest. One of them, according to Al Jazeera, was Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Ahmed, who we had on the live stream a couple of weeks ago, who had spent a few weeks in Gaza. And I've seen people saying, no one should have gone at all. But what is reported is that Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Ahmed handed over a letter from a child in Gaza to Biden. I mean, you could say that's a powerful gesture in some ways, but it's not as if Biden and his henchmen don't know what's happening and are going to be moved by things like that. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Biden and his henchmen know exactly what they're doing in Gaza. They see the same photographs and videos that we see. They are 100% committed to keeping Israel armed and keeping Israel covered for this genocide. I think it was a powerful protest that Dr. Ahmed engaged in during this like deranged iftar. And
but they're still trying. I mean, the really, I mean, I'm trying to watch my language because this is a family show, but they're still trying to present this administration as if it is, on the side of Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims.
Right.
And, this month, April, is Arab American Heritage Month. And I don't know if you saw the unhinged proclamation that Joe Biden issued to celebrate Arab American Heritage Month. And I mean, it just makes them look so much more out of touch, so much more insulting, so much more contemptuous of people. It's beyond it.
Right.
It's beyond imagination.
And the closer that we get to this like dreadful election, they're going to be pandering in the most depraved way to Muslims and Arab Americans and people in swing states like Wisconsin and
Michigan. Except in the one way that that Arabs, Muslims, and Americans of every background are demanding, which is that Joe Biden force Israel, because he can, to comply with the ceasefire demanded by the UN Security Council a week ago.
Right. I mean, the bar is on the floor. Yeah. That's how low it is. Just to do that, he is refusing. He's refusing. He's refusing to comply with international law. He's, people like John Kirby are out there saying, that Israel has not violated one international humanitarian legal precedent in the last 6 months. I mean, they really.
And there's a reason for that. I'm just seeing a message from Tamara. We're still working to connect with Abubaker, and I hope we will. I think we'll be able to. But about that clip in the news brief of Kirby saying that, we haven't, and that journalist saying, in 5 months, you haven't seen a single incident where Israel has violated international humanitarian law. And there's a reason. I mean, Kirby knows he's lying. You can even see the smirk on his face as he tells those lies. And same thing with Matthew Miller and Vedant Patel and the other people at the State Department. They have to tell that lie, because if they say that, yes, we found even a single incident where Israel is violating international humanitarian law, then they have to acknowledge that it is illegal for the United States under U.S. law to be transferring weapons to Israel. Yeah. Because the U.S. law, there's the Leahy law and other provisions that make it illegal to transfer weapons to a country that is using them to commit such atrocities, or that is blocking humanitarian aid, as Israel is openly doing. And instead, what the Biden administration is doing, and this happens every week, there's an announcement of new arms shipments, but they just announced over the last couple of days, as the reports from al-Shifa were coming out, of the just house of horrors, endless horror upon horror, that the Biden administration is approving more shipments of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. And so it's just so utterly depraved.
Completely. I mean, we watch the worst thing that's ever happened day after day after day after day. And I mean, this week is going to mark 6 months, although time seems meaningless right now. A lot of things seem meaningless. I just can't. I cannot comprehend the scale of this genocide and how it's just continuing to unfold minute by minute.
And you remember back at the beginning when we would be on and talking about this, when there would be reports that, the administration is giving them till the end of December. Right. Then it became the middle of January. Then it became the end of January. And now it's just they don't even talk about ending it, because they were trying to give Israel enough time to, quote unquote, finish the job, to destroy Hamas. And 6 months in, Israel has only achieved mass murder, not a single military achievement. It looks like Abubaker is able to join us.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, let's bring him on. Abubaker.
Hi.
Hi. It's so good to see you.
Hi, Abubaker. How are you?
Oh, it looks like
he is. He's muted. I hope we're able to connect. People know how difficult it is to connect with anyone in Gaza, but Abubaker was very keen to join us, and we were very keen to have him. And it's so important to continue to hear from people in Gaza, to hear their voices, to hear their experiences. And what I'm hearing...
Here he is.
Hello, Abubaker.
Hi.
Hi.
Tell us how you're doing. We know that just before you joined us, there was a bombing close by. Are you okay? Is everything all right? Give us a sense of what's happening there.
It's all okay. It's all right, by the way, because I think there was an explosive bombing close from Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in al-Zawaida area, and it was very, it was massive, and we don't know whether there are casualties, but for sure, yes, there are casualties. But at the same time, yes, bombings haven't stopped since the early morning. And even now, if you can hear in the background, there are still continuous bombings happening right now. So the situation overall is good. We say it's good, but it's in fact very risky and unsafe.
Alhamdulillah ala salamitkum. And I don't know if you can see all of the messages in the chat from the many people, more than 2,000 people watching us live, who are saying that they're praying for your safety and the safety of your family, Abubaker. There's a lot of people sending you love.
I really thank every one of them, and I really appreciate that. As you've said, it's been an absolute difficulty to join you today. But as I've told you, I was keen, I was insistent, and yes, I'm here with you today.
Abubaker, maybe we can bring up the piece that you wrote for us a few days ago. And have you talk a little bit about it. Let's see if we can find it. Yeah. So tell us about your latest feature that you wrote for the Electronic Intifada, and how you're able to work, to report, to write, to interview people under these conditions?
Well, look, this piece particularly is the hardest ever, because it conveys the reality behind our life, my life particularly, and my family's right now under these circumstances. If you think about it, I really don't want to comment further, but look, since you have asked, I didn't know why I wrote this one and how I wrote this one, because literally, if I write more about the heartbreaks, about the atrocities my family and I are going through alongside people here around us, it's going to take millions of words. When you look at it and you read every single letter conveys a message, because it's gone beyond the literal and the connotation of what a tragedy means. During this Ramadan, now we are in the 23rd day of Ramadan. Ramadan should have been a month of contemplation, a month of relief, a month of closeness from God, a month of happiness and celebrations. But I really don't know what the word celebration means anymore.
Abubaker, I want to just share a few lines from your piece, and you're right. Every line, every word of it is very deeply moving and conveys so much. But you say, the background image on my mobile phone shows French fries and ketchup. Whenever my 2-year-old niece sees the phone, she licks its screen. Her own mother cannot give her enough food. My other nephews and nieces play a frightening war game. They imagine that a missile has hit and killed them. One of my sisters is pregnant. She is filled with dread. Just those 3 sentences capture so much. But I just want to ask you now, regarding, you just now passed iftar time in Gaza, where people are breaking their fast. How are people breaking their fast? What is the situation in terms of just the most basic needs now? Food, water, medicine, and so on. And we know that that's leaving aside the constant risk of bombing and death from the air.
Yes, it's if you look at what people are breaking the fast on, it's absolutely heartbreaking, because initially, look, this is what we eat, because what we eat, as I've told you, the worst quality ever you can have in terms of food. And now, because this is something to bring you, by the way, and to bring the audience, I'm probably not the same as I talked to you earlier last month, because it's in fact that I'm ill. I'm very sick at the moment. I'm having a gastritis, and at the same time, I'm having a bacterial tendonitis. I'm sick. Tamara has known that, by the way, but I was insistent and keen to speak with you today. Look, why have I contracted this? It's because of the quality of food we are having and the malnutrition. How can people are now just breaking their fast on the little things they have, which is like lentil soup, some dates, and some dates that are not even, they are rotten. In fact, they're not even good to eat or to taste. It's at the same time that we don't eat. Look, eating sometimes gives you a sense of, enjoyment, of joy. And at the same time, eating is relief, is probably a therapy for most people. But how can this be if you really don't have anything to do for iftar or at the same time suhoor? I swear I'm taking more than 4 medications at the moment so that I make sure that my stomach ache is not going to back anymore. It's not going to be back anymore. It is the same thing for the whole people here in the Gaza Strip. What we are receiving from food and water, the contaminated parts of all of this are absolutely lethal. That's why when you are going out in the streets and see people inside the hospitals, hospitals are filled with hepatitis A, with jaundice, and with infections at the same time. That's a symptom of the Israelis warring on Gaza. So that's why Ramadan is just a heartbreak.
And Abubaker, when you do go out into the streets, are there any agencies operating in Gaza? Is UNRWA operating in your area? Are there other international humanitarian agencies or charities operating in your area? Are they able to get food, medicine to people around you and your community?
Look, in my area, UNRWA is only operating in schools. That means only few people receive aid from medications, food, and other stuff. It's the same thing for most people. If UNRWA works only in schools, what about the thousands outside in tents and in the streets? What about the thousands in houses who have stayed in their houses under destroyed roofs? What about the others outside in the streets who are suffering and more injured at the same time? For the World Central Kitchen, because this has been a very viral topic over the course of time, the last time I spotted the World Central Kitchen was 2 days before the attack. They were operating around. A lot of people were benefiting from the World Central Kitchen, but it's the same thing again. It does just, meet the needs of only a tiny part of the population here in Deir al-Balah, where more than 500,000 people are taking shelter. If it is about that, the humanitarian aid organizations are operating on the Gaza Strip, why are people ill? Why are the streets filled with injuries? If they are literally working, they are being sold in the open markets, the aid they are delivering. So how on earth are people saying that people are getting aid? No, it's in fact a big lie. Whatever they do, I'm sorry, I'm responsible for what I'm saying, because what they do is just for media purposes. That, okay, we are doing this kind of stuff. People of Gaza, we're just, deriving people's sympathy around the world that we are working inside Gaza. Tell me why I should see my parents every day suffering. And about the medications, I haven't yet got any for my both parents. Okay, it is the same for my sister, who is still praying for God that she won't give birth until this horrific war ends. If this is true, also, why poor houses operate daily in the Gaza Strip? If the humanitarian aid organizations operate properly in the Gaza Strip, especially in Deir al-Balah, are they really operating? They're not, in fact, at all. They're doing just a tiny, process of what they are doing every day. Because a lot of people are depending mainly on poor houses, what we call in Arabic takiya. So this is from where they get food. And by the way, these poor houses are run by ordinary people here in the Gaza Strip. They are seeking ajr or reward. So where are the so-called humanitarian aid organization we are talking about? They're not here at all. And even when they operate, they're under attack by the Israeli occupation forces, which means that this is a deliberate act of starving the population in the Gaza Strip, and particularly in Deir al-Balah, where more people are still coming to Deir al-Balah and seek refuge, but the living circumstances are truly unbearable.
And when you say, Abubaker, that people are still coming into Deir al-Balah, do you know where they're coming from? What areas they're coming from?
There has been a big round, huge number of people coming from the latest al-Shifa raid. They somehow survived and came to seek refuge here in Deir al-Balah. They don't have anything, so they are completely lost. And at the same time, there are more people are trying to flee from the northern parts of Gaza, like al-Shifa, Tufah, and other parts of those areas. But yes, they are not finding places because Deir al-Balah is being too overcrowded, and it is still getting increasingly overcrowded, where no aid, no food, no water is being given very enough for those starving people. And it's just like, that even in people can't find spaces in schools, even schools are filled or are overcrowded, even stadiums, football stadiums. All the stadium in Deir al-Balah and the Gaza Strip that is still sound, Al-Dura Stadium, is now a sanctuary to more than 10,000 people coming from the north of Gaza. Even other clubs like Al-Salah Football Club, which should be a stage for sports and entertainment, is now a sanctuary, is now a refuge for more than 1,000 people. So it's the same story, it's the same tragic story. And even if you talk about it for all eternity, it doesn't make any sense for the people who are behind this genocide.
Abubaker, you said that people who have been arriving in central Gaza, where you are, have been coming from neighborhoods around al-Shifa Hospital, where for 2 continuous weeks, the Israeli army turned the hospital into a slaughterhouse, and as well destroyed the neighborhoods around the medical complex itself. Have you been talking with people who were forced to flee those neighborhoods around al-Shifa, and if so, what have they been saying about what they endured, what they saw?
Yes, I talked to some of them. One of them told me that when the raid happened, the eyes of the soldiers looked bloodthirsty, that they wanted to kill everybody, that they wanted to strike everyone, everything in the hospital. So that they were not allowed to breathe, so their breaths are heard. And then the first thing the Israeli occupation forces told them when they raided the hospital, that they wouldn't harm any civilians, but just then they killed 300 of them. At the same time, when they were arrested, for investigations, they were handcuffed, they were blindfolded, and they were at the same time, hand and feet bound. When that happened, if they were arrested for 2 consecutive days, that means they were not allowed to do anything all the time across the 2 days. If somebody, that included children, by the way, under the age of 10, when that happened, when a child was asking one of the Israeli occupation forces or soldiers that he wanted to see one of his family, he was shot between his legs. The same if somebody asked for some water. Even the fact that they were fasting did not push the Israeli occupation forces to deal with them from a religious and Islamic perspective. Given the fact that they are fasting and giving them food and water to break their fast, to have support, all of this hasn't been dealt with at all. And it's just that he told me, they treated us as as animals, that they were shouting at us, that they were not giving us any attention, that they were at the same time dealing with us with disdain. So that they're telling us that you're nothing for us. You are nothing. Even when they were fled, when they were evacuated by them, they had to walk after torture, physically and mentally. They were forced to walk in the same way they were arrested, many kilometers, and then after 2 days of arrest, they were obliged to walk from Gaza to Deir al-Balah in the southern area and southern territory, just about, you're talking about at least 20 kilometers. That is a lot of suffering. So that's how they treated them.
And Abubaker, right now Israel continues to threaten Rafah. You're in Deir al-Balah, which is you're in the central area, southern central area of Gaza. The next big city to the south is Rafah, which normally before the genocide had about 300,000 people, but now it's more than 1.5 million people. I've seen some reports who are sheltering there. And Israel continues to threaten that they will attack Rafah. What are people saying about that? Are you seeing people coming from Rafah to Deir al-Balah? Are people trying to now escape from Rafah? What can you tell us about that?
Yes, that's great to bring to the audience, because there is an important point, by the way. Across the last 2 weeks, there have been relentless attacks of the outskirts of Deir al-Balah, of the eastern outskirts of Deir al-Balah. That is the border with the Israeli forces. Now, given this fact, by the way, there was an abrupt invasion about a week ago of Deir al-Balah, the southern areas, in the pre-dawn. So people were traumatized and were terrified that the ground invasion would happen in Deir al-Balah. So people are still fleeing from Rafah to Deir al-Balah, by the way, but at the same time, there's speculations that Deir al-Balah is going to be invaded. They are very afraid that Deir al-Balah will be invaded earlier, because we've seen the analyses by military experts saying that Deir al-Balah would be a prior step or stop to the Israeli military forces to invade, because they want to see if they want to operate there. So people are totally bewildered about where to go. It is the same thing for us here in Deir al-Balah, because Rafah is not safe, Deir al-Balah is not safe. At least over the last week, there have been more than 100 killed and hundreds injured and wounded in Deir al-Balah, including the Western kitchen and the 4 people that were killed. So you think that Deir al-Balah is safe, and you think that Rafah is safe. People are coming from Rafah and people are coming from Deir al-Balah. Both areas are literally risky, but both areas, people don't know where to go. Both are unsafe. So it's just a matter of waiting and seeing the news confirmed and waiting for leaflets thrown by the Israeli forces to see which area is going to be invaded, as they did, because leaflets were thrown over there around 2 days ago, and those leaflets said or read that the Israeli occupation forces will go into every meter of the Gaza Strip, will enter every meter of the Gaza Strip. So that's why it has been causing a lot of panic and a lot of terror among people.
Finally, Abubaker, we just have a couple minutes left, but what, you know, we also had a story on EI just a few days ago about a man who is building and maintaining a garden in Gaza. And I was speaking to someone the other day who said, you know, it's really important to also remember, there's the story. Also remember that Gaza is a beautiful place and still has an immense amount of beauty, even though Israel is trying to destroy it. Can you talk about your Gaza and where you find beauty these days?
Well, this is a great task, because it's really important to switch the conversation. The topic has been quite miserable, to be honest, so we can really smile now. Look, now the beauty of Gaza is still there all the time. Now, the people, what we are looking for the most, what we are looking at the most, is the little plants growing around. So as I wrote in the base, I was just planting some basil. And by the way, the good news is that I have despite all the circumstances, despite all the miserable and hard circumstances, I have a yellow rose that is now growing very well, by the way. And when the roses are out, I will show them to you, inshallah. So it's going to be great that those roses are going to be growing and that they will be looking very beautiful. and it will reflect the unprecedented, unmatched beauty of the Gaza Strip. Because that's why even the basil, even the roses, even the plants we are having here, all reflect the inside of our souls, because our souls are beautiful, because our souls are sincere, and they and at the same time lovely. I believe so. That's why we still have these plants in our area. So Gaza will come back to its beauty one day, it's for sure. And that everyone should feel hope. There's no reason in the world, even the Israeli forces, even amidst the bombing, the destruction, and everything, there's no reason that anybody can really upset us. No, we are still smiling. I'm still happy that I'm with you, and that the genocide and everything. No, I'm so happy. And by the way, I'm very happy. I'm delighted to be with you, and that the roses will be out again. And I'm very sure. I'm very, very confident, by the way, about that. And I'm still watching it every day, because this is the beauty of our souls, not the beauty of plants. This is the beauty of cause and people, not the beauty, not the destruction. The destruction will not impede us. The destruction will not stop us from seeing beautiful things. That's our soul. That's our essence, and it's something that we want to convey to the world, that we are going to see Gaza beautiful today, tomorrow, and every time. That's what we believe in.
Abubaker, you are a beautiful soul, and I personally, and I know many of us will be waiting to see the photos of your yellow roses. And I know now that the yellow rose for all of us will take on a wonderful symbolic significance. And we're seeing, just so you know, how many messages of love and support there are. People are very moved by what you're saying, and by your continued reporting and writing and continuing to bear witness to what's happening. And we will try to keep doing our part, which is to continue to raise our voices in every way that we can to end this genocide, to stop this massacre. And I'm looking forward to the day when I can visit you in this beautiful Gaza once again.
Thank you so much. Finally, I have a message to all of you, to the viewers and everyone. It's very important to tell you that, believe me, that this time and every time with you, you are the echo of our voices. We are absolutely nothing without you, the echo of our voices. And even when you told me last time that people don't know anything about the Electronic Intifada, I told them, and they were utterly happy about that. And every comment for the audience who are writing to me at the moment, every comment I read, every literal comment I read, that inspires and empowers me to continue. I'm proud that I write. I'm proud that people listen to us. But what I want to say in the end, that sometimes, as I told you, and I will say it all the time, even under the worst circumstances, when you find your people, you find your healing word. That is literally you. That is literally you. So that's why I'm healing all the time, because of you. You are our healing word here in the Gaza Strip, the echo of our voices. And by the way, you will be the beautiful leaves of the yellow roses that will be coming out soon.
Abubaker, we are so grateful and so privileged to know you and to work with you. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And we'll have you on literally anytime. So please come back soon.
Anytime.
Send us those photos. Back. Yeah.
I literally, like, you're very welcome. And I'm telling you all the time, the honor is mine, the happiness is mine, the happiness is our family. And also, it will always be my pleasure. I'm honored and I'm pleased and I'm delighted. So thanks to every one of you. And by the way, if I survive, you probably need to listen from me a lot of thanks to every one of you. So thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you.
Abubaker
God
Abed,
protect you.
our contributor live from the Gaza Strip. Of course, you can go to electronicintifada.net, read his latest story, A Ramadan of Heartbreak. Leave comments on the story because Abubaker reads them. And we'll have you back on very soon. Please be safe, of course, as much as possible.
The very
Thanks,
best.
Abubaker.
Thank you, Abubaker. We'll see you soon.
A Lion of Gaza, indeed. You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah. We're now joined by Dr. Yipeng Ge, a physician based in Ottawa, formerly a resident physician at the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Medicine. In November, Dr. Ge was suspended by the university over social media posts supportive of Palestinian rights. He was reinstated in January, but has not returned. In December, he resigned from the board of the Canadian Medical Association, citing the group's refusal to take a stance in the face of the ongoing Israeli apartheid and genocide. And in February, Dr. Ge spent a week in Gaza's southern city of Rafah. Dr. Yipeng Ge, thank you so much for being with us today on the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thank you so much for having me.
First off, your thoughts on, just what Abubaker was talking about in terms of, he's someone with already a chronic illness. He, like so many others, are having to choose between starving or eating bad quality food. He's talking about hepatitis. He's talking about all the the effects of not having, of Israel engineering the starvation and forcing people to make these just impossible choices. What are your thoughts on hearing him and knowing what you know about chronic illness and starvation in Gaza?
I mean, it's an honor to first of all be here and to listen to Abubaker share his story and also his hope of what gives him hope, and I think being in community and being here. So thank you for having me first and foremost, and this is healing for me to be in this space. I think so. I'm a primary care doctor. That's what I have been trained in. I've been trained in emergency rooms across the country in Canada, as well as in under-resourced places like Nunavut in Canada's north. And I thought that was under-resourced until, certainly working in Rafah and bearing witness to what's happening at the European Gaza Hospital in Khan Yunis as well, is a whole different scenario, right? And when I think about chronic disease as a primary care doctor, I'm actually seeing patients this morning and this afternoon after this, is the necessary preconditions to be able to manage a chronic disease is all of the important social determinants of health, of having a roof over your head, having like nutritious food, having clean water, having the ability to have money and education so that you can manage all these other things to have a long, fulfilling, healthy life. And to manage a chronic disease, specifically, certain ones like heart disease or high blood pressure or diabetes, or any of the other kinds of chronic diseases that one can encounter, it becomes impossible to manage when you don't have those necessary preconditions for life, for a decent life. Basic human rights, we're talking clean water, we're talking nutritious food, we're talking shelter. And these are things that have been completely systematically withheld or destroyed by Israel in the Gaza Strip. And we know that these things were actually withheld even before October 7th. There's this like Gaza diet that we talk about colloquially, where the number of caloric, the number of calories or the caloric intake of people were calculated so as to not kill people, but to limit and stunt their growth. And I remember meeting children around the clinic that followed me around with their smiles and their greetings. And I thought they were, 4, 5, 6 years old by their height. And I talked to other staff members, people that knew these children at the clinic, and they were like, no, you got it wrong. They're like 10, 11, 12 years old. And so the consequences of this over 17-year blockade on the Gaza Strip, including that of humanitarian aid, is just so severe. And now we're seeing trucks enter at a fraction, a third of what was entering even before, when we knew that those caloric intake was being restricted. And so the ways in which anyone can manage chronic disease is almost impossible. When I think about trying to manage high blood pressure or diabetes, I was really not sure what we were doing in these clinics, because what people needed was food, what people needed was water, and also to manage certain conditions, you do need blood work to kind of ensure that a patient is on a medication safely. There are medications that we actually recommend to not take if you're not feeling well, or if you're having a gastrointestinal infection, a respiratory infection, or if you're not eating and drinking properly. But how can we counsel someone in this situation that maybe don't take your high blood pressure medications or diabetes medications because you're not eating and drinking? You're not eating and drinking because Israel is withholding these things systematically. And so the medicine that we're trying to do in primary care in Rafah and Khan Yunis is impossible.
And Dr. Ge, thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us. And I mean, and when you talk about chronic illnesses, things that in, say, Canada or the United States or in Jordan or in many countries are completely manageable, whether it's high blood pressure or diabetes, these can be very, not to say they're not serious, but they're manageable with diet, with medication. What happens for people when they run out of their diabetes medication or their high blood pressure medication? Or, I mean, we're not talking now about acute illnesses, people, the thousands of people living with cancer in Gaza who are not, who don't have access to care, but we're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of millions of people who have chronic conditions, and this is not as, we all see on our social media the utter horrors that are happening in Gaza, the shredded bodies, the bombing, the people being rescued from under the rubble. But it's hard to show a picture of what happens to an elderly person who can't control their diabetes, or who can't get enough nutrition, or can't control their hypertension, or whatever it may be. What are we not seeing is what I want to ask you. What did you see that we here are not seeing?
There's so much, right? There's so many stories that are left being untold, because I think there's a degree of desperation to humanize Palestinians and what they're going through. And I think a lot of the attention is being paid to women and children, for example, when we know that Palestinian men are being slaughtered in al-Shifa hospital, for example, like all of them. And doctors are being slaughtered. And I think the ways in which I think about the healthcare impacts of what we saw, not only is it the overlapping crises of food, water, and shelter insecurity that has completely decimated everyone, has affected everyone, but when we think about who is most vulnerable, we do think about children, we think about infants, but there's also older adults, people with chronic diseases, people with disabilities, visible disabilities, also more hidden disabilities. I spoke to a psychiatrist and a pharmacist at one of the primary care clinics, where mental health medications like antipsychotic medications for people with schizophrenia has just been completely forgotten about. And so there are people that I don't even know where they are, because as a doctor, when you're there as a foreign doctor, you're not allowed to leave the medical compound. There's this thing called deconfliction, where if you're in a deconflicted zone, then you're not supposed to leave unless if you tell the UN and whatever. And so there are patients in like active psychosis that haven't received their antipsychotic medications for months, probably 6 months now, that are just suffering, and their family members, I'm sure, are trying to manage and cope. And so when we think about who is most vulnerable in society, a lot of these humans, right, like adults with chronic diseases like cancer, like all these other chronic diseases that we've already mentioned, are being completely forgotten. There's a challenge, and I remember Dr. Ben Thompson's interview with both of you here. The challenge of diagnosing cancer now with, there's no CT scanners, really, and there's no imaging capability, really limited blood work capability. The main laboratory was in al-Shifa hospital, which is completely destroyed now. Everything has been destroyed at al-Shifa hospital, to the point where there's no pathologist to make a tissue diagnosis for cancer. So you can't diagnose cancer now in any kind of like sort of the word in a way that is standard care, quality standard care. And there's also no way to treat cancer. And so all of these chronic diseases are really very much in the shadows with respect to what's happening. And when we talk about the number of deaths, it's such a gross underestimate. The numbers I think about of the children dying of starvation, for example, those numbers came from the north, and they came when I left Rafah. And I treated patients that had such severe malnutrition that I was worried that they were going to die the next day, if not the next week. And, the patients that started to be counted in the north, they had the privilege of dying in front of a nurse or a doctor to be counted. And so I think about all of those untold stories of the children, older adults, people with chronic diseases, people with disabilities that are dying of starvation or dehydration or any other chronic disease and are not being counted because they can't get to a clinic or a hospital because healthcare has been systematically attacked and destroyed in the entire Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
So there's just so many stories left untold. When there is a ceasefire, and I know there will be one, and when humanitarian aid can enter unrestricted, that is when the horrors actually come. I think about how when I was there in Rafah, I was speaking to the colleagues that I went with and the other doctors. I could not comprehend the suffering that was happening. It was incomprehensible. And to know that it's actually getting worse each day, each passing week, is still unimaginable, because I think so many of us still hold on to our humanity. We still recognize and see the humanity in others.
Dr. Ge, during this latest siege of al-Shifa and the horrors that were revealed in the last few days after the Israeli forces withdrew, one of the facts that came out is that the Israeli forces essentially executed Dr. Ahmed Maqadma. Tamara, I don't know if you can see in the chat, I dropped a tweet from Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sitta, the British Palestinian surgeon who was in Gaza for so long at the beginning of this genocide, and he paid tribute to Dr. Ahmed Maqadma, who was executed, according to the reports that came out, along with his mother at al-Shifa hospital, and many tributes to him, paying tribute to the fact that he never left the side of his patients, that he continued to try to care for them until his last moment. And I'd just like to ask you, Dr. Ge, just tell us about some of, and of course, Dr. Ahmed is among so many medical workers and doctors who have been targeted and murdered, first responders, rescue workers who have been targeted and murdered by Israel. But I just want to ask you to talk about some of your colleagues in Gaza who you met and what you can tell us about them.
You know, the doctors and the nurses, the medical volunteers that I met while in Gaza, I think uphold the highest levels of medical professionalism and ethics and morals that we enter this profession with to help our patients and communities, no matter who they are, and also this deep commitment and moral clarity as to, in the face of bombs dropping around you, you don't abandon your patients. You look after your patients and you care for them because you have the skills and expertise to help, and you do what you can. Unfortunately, to the last moment for some of these doctors. I have the deepest respect for these doctors. Like they, and I only wish I knew them for longer, or some of them I wish I got the chance to meet them. I think about my colleagues in Canada, like Dr. Tarek Loubani or Dr. Ben Thompson, who have not only been bearing witness to what's happening, and Ben Thompson coming back from Gaza recently as well himself, but to have lost close friends, to have lost doctors that they've trained with and trained themselves, because they knew about the importance of building capacity in Gaza, and giving people who are Palestinian in Gaza the tools and the skills and expertise to look after their own community and their own peoples. And what we're seeing right now is a systematic destruction of that, to destroy the hospitals, to destroy like the people that are in these hospitals trying to care for their community and population, to the point of not only making the situation and the make life unlivable, but to make it impossible to receive medical care at this point. As I watched the 8 or so minute press conference by the head doctor, surgeon at the al-Shifa hospital last night, and it's just been completely decimated, and yet they continue to try to care for their patients. Like one of the doctors that I met at the primary care clinic, they themselves are from the north, from al-Shifa area, and have been displaced 4 or 5 times, lost family members, lost their home, and they're living in a tent outside of this primary care clinic and doing the unimaginable work of trying to do what they can and treating, you know, bacterial pneumonias, bacterial gastroenteritis, so much hepatitis A, wound infections. But when patients need food and water, and there is none, and to see dehydrated children and malnourished children and to only give them IV fluid, which introduces another source of possible infection, makes the child like cry and it's irritating, and it causes trauma, and the parent or the guardian or the adult, or sometimes it's just like another sibling that's with them because they've lost so many family members. It's distressing for them as well. And yet, despite all this, they continue and persist and find ways to care for their patients. If anything, it's to see and to hear someone deeply. And that is a lot of what I do in primary care here in Canada, is to recognize someone suffering. And sometimes you don't have the material conditions in which someone needs to heal, but at least you get this opportunity to like spend time with them and see them as a full complex human, and to share that human experience with someone. But I think even that is being destroyed and impossible to do in Gaza right now because of how many patients there are and how stretched the resources are, to the point where in the primary care clinic, I was seeing patients so quickly that it was like 60 to 70 patients in a matter of a half day, so in the matter of a morning. And there's no real way to actually have a meaningful conversation other than just screening for a couple of symptoms and just, getting them some medication that they might need. The clinics that we went to didn't have antibiotics when we arrived. We brought a supply of antibiotics and started prescribing those. But this is not a solution. There's no humanitarian solution to what's happening. We're seeing systematic attacks on healthcare, on people who heal, as Dr. Tanya Hassan has already put it so clearly, that healthcare workers have a direct target on their back, to the point where they're changing out of their scrubs into civilian clothes because they know that because civilians know too that they're going to be taken by the Israeli forces, detained, tortured, and executed. And it's despite all this, they persist, and I'm so honored to call them my colleagues.
Yeah. We only have a few minutes left, Dr. Ge, but I wanted to ask about the response we've seen like the complete failure of the American Medical Association, for example, here in the States, to express any sort of even just mild condemnation of Israel's decimation of Gaza's healthcare system. And we've seen pretty much the same in Canada, where you work and live. Seems to be absolutely no solidarity at all within the Canadian medical establishment for their colleagues risking their lives to treat patients in Gaza. Can you talk a little bit about that and what, as you returned from Gaza back to Canada, what the response has been from your colleagues in Ottawa?
The clinics that I work at in Ottawa and in the greater Ottawa region have actually been really supportive. Like, people have reached out to me to say, like, thank you for what you're doing. But I think there's still this blanket atmosphere of silencing, of anti-Palestinian racism, of people with their own internalized anti-Semitism, afraid of being called out as anti-Semitic for any speech related to Palestine. And, I think the medical establishment in Canada as a whole, as institutions, continue to be extremely silent. If anything, they're perpetuating anti-Palestinian racism by creating the conditions in which people are afraid to speak up because they are disciplining doctors, medical students, residents. But I will say, I think the tide is very much turning, where we have coalitions of doctors and other health professionals creating communities of care, of support. I think about Health Workers Alliance for Palestine, based in Canada. We have members across Canada now from many different backgrounds in healthcare, including doctors, nurses, social workers, naturopaths, occupational therapists, dietitians, dentists even. And so the tide is turning in terms of how do we co-create the coalitions that we want to see through the same values and principles that we share. And how do we do this work in healthcare to help liberate Palestine, as in the way that Palestine and Gaza are liberating us from the very clear, blatant abuses of institutional power rooted in anti-Palestinian racism. And we're seeing doctors, I think, over time now, unfortunately, it's taken 6 months, growing a backbone to speak up. We see a group of doctors in Quebec that have written open letter to their college to demand a statement, and their college responded with said statement. We have over 1,000 doctors doing the same for the Canadian Medical Association, but they continue to take the stance of being neutral in the face of structural oppression and ongoing genocide, when this is an organization that I was on the board of just last year, and knowing what they did for Ukraine, actually, I don't know if everyone is aware of what the Canadian Medical Association did for Ukraine when the Russian Federation escalated and invaded Ukraine, was that they put out multiple statements in support of Ukraine related to healthcare as well. And then they went so far as to divest from the Russian Federation and made a separate post about that, separate statement. And then they worked with other healthcare institutions in Canada, including pediatric healthcare institutions, to fundraise for humanitarian aid. And they put out of pocket for themselves $250,000 for humanitarian aid for Ukraine. And it's been complete radio silence for Palestine and for Gaza. And so the racist double standards could not be any more clear.
And you actually resigned from the Canadian Medical Association board over that, and you wrote a very eloquent and powerful letter that you actually published. A couple of things. I know that we only have a minute or so, but I just wanted to comment on a couple of things you said. It strikes me, as Nora said in the introduction, that you were suspended in November for things that you said related to Gaza. Dr. Ben Thompson, your colleague who we had on, he was suspended for things he said. You don't need to go into the details of that. But the point is that here are doctors actually being punished for doing the very thing that we're all taught doctors are supposed to do, which is to care first and foremost for human life, to have compassion, the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, to heal people. And so it just strikes me that these institutions are actually punishing you for standing by the most marginalized people. So it's very heartening to see, to hear from you about how doctors are now organizing, not just doctors, but people in the medical profession organizing to push back and to speak out. And the other thing I want to say is the importance of the voice of medical workers, because remember this, that Israel deliberately, as a propaganda strategy, pushed so-called first responders. In many cases, they weren't actually first responders. They were Israeli military personnel, or they came from that Jewish extremist group Zaka. But they pushed them into the media to tell atrocity stories, things that turned out to be complete lies, because they made a calculation and they said it, that, people trust first responders. They trust people who are rescuers or who are in the medical profession. So let's push them out to tell their lies. So Israel actually tried to weaponize the trust and respect that people have for first responders and medical workers in the service of genocide, in the service of propaganda. There were even 100 Israeli doctors who notoriously signed a letter supporting the war and the genocide. So I just wanted to commend you, and on behalf of many of our viewers who are reflecting that, for speaking out, for your insistence on doing so, and to give every encouragement to the medical workers in Canada who are now organizing to do that collectively. It's so vital.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words. I mean, I think about what I signed up for in medicine, but also the framing in which I entered medicine is through the framing of wanting to work on structural oppression and racism and colonialism from a healthcare lens. That's always been my work. My work has been in Indigenous health and anti-racism and decolonizing health and healthcare, including public health, for over 10 years now. And that is the context in which I entered and learned about the issue of Palestine from the framing of settler colonialism as a structural determinant of health. And so what we've also seen through these attacks and reprisals is that they do not stand the test of time. Like the University of Ottawa completely walked back their indefinite suspension on me without any disciplinary action, but did not so much, offer apology or remorse or any reassurance that this wouldn't happen to me or anyone else in the future. And it's just so ironic that they, continue to have their articles about me and my work for patients and community, because that's what it's always about, instead of upholding these institutions that continue to abuse their institutional power rooted in anti-Palestinian racism. But, I think we have to continue to center the Palestinians in Gaza that are experiencing an ongoing genocide. These front lines that are happening in Canada and the United States on university campuses, at medical schools, this anti-Palestinian racism, it is so important to tackle as well. But it is very much a distraction, and a distraction from the atrocities of what's happening in Gaza, right? Where people want to center what's happening in Gaza, calling attention to it, wanting, universities, medical schools to take part in, BDS campaigns. And then people are getting this anti-Palestinian racism backlash that is completely racist and discriminatory in of itself. So I do see the tides turning, and very much like what I'm doing is just what feels right as the next step. Like I want to tell myself in the months and years to come, in the decades to come, if I live that long, that I did everything that I could in this moment, everything within my power, to put an end to this ongoing genocide. And I think more and more doctors in Canada and other healthcare professionals are certainly getting more comfortable because there's power in numbers, and we protect each other. Like in the way that Dr. Ben Thompson reached out to me and protected me in many, many ways. I got suspended at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday from a phone call by someone who didn't even make the decision. So they were just a messenger. And before noon, I had already had a 1-hour conversation with Ben Thompson, who I didn't know at that point, about strategy and next steps, and getting in touch with his legal team, who became my legal team as well. So there are certainly ways to push beyond anti-Palestinian racism, and also see it as an opportunity that we will not go down without a fight. If anything, we're going to take retaliatory actions, like Dr. Ben Thompson is suing the hospital now that suspended him out of racism.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of your work, and for being, really an instructive mentor to other, young physicians who are watching what's happening, and watching how people are using their consciousness and their morals and ethics, really living up to the oath that physicians take to help people. And so your work is extraordinary. Thank you so much for being with us. We hope that you can come back on at some point soon. There's so much to talk about in terms of health care and the crushing of the health system in Gaza. So we'd love to have you back on.
For sure. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you so much. Dr. Yipeng Ge, a physician based in Ottawa. How can people read your posts and follow you on Twitter? What's your handle?
I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and my Instagram handle is my first name, YIPNG.GE, and my Twitter account is also just my name.
Excellent. And your website we have down there on the bottom at the scroll, ipeng.ca. Thank you so much, Dr. Ge.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah, and we wanted to bring on our colleague, David Cronin, who wrote, hi, Dave,
Hi, how are you, Nora?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you back,
Thank you very
David.
much.
Tell us about what happened. You were censored by a Dutch university. Tell us about why and what's happened since.
Yeah. Well, as I'm sure you're aware, Nora, for a number of years now, there's been an annual event called Israel Apartheid Week. Israel Apartheid Week is marked in universities across the world. It focuses on Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. It has been held for a number of years in the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I'd imagine the university weren't probably not exactly delighted that it was taking place on their campus, but they tolerated that they were prepared to tolerate it until this year. I was invited by a number of students there to give a talk as part of Israel Apartheid Week this year. 24 hours before I was scheduled to give a talk at the university, I received an email from one of the organizers saying, "We're sorry, the administration has banned the event." Apparently, it was too sensitive. I should add that nobody from the university's administration had the courtesy to contact me directly to say why I was objectionable. But I reached out to the university and I did get a statement from them. The statement I got was from a woman called Toni Visser, who is a dean at the university. And her statement, her brief comments were, I could only describe them as convoluted and contradictory. I've been told by the organizers that they objected to the fact that I was described as an activist journalist on the flyer for the event. Visser claimed that she had no problem with me being an activist and a journalist. But then she went on to say that the fact that I was described as an activist and a journalist meant that they could not assess whether this was an appropriate academic event for the university. It wasn't an academic event to begin with. I'm not an academic. It wasn't something that was a formal, I wasn't teaching a formal class in the university or anything like that. I was invited to give a talk in the evening.
And David,
all over the world have political events all the time. They clearly decided to censor this event in the middle of the Gaza genocide. If we could just add briefly, actually, the title of the talk was How Europe Enabled the Gaza Genocide.
And you did actually give that talk online, but they
Correct.
banned it. They banned the event in person that was supposed
Correct.
to happen on the campus and that the students had invited you to. I mean, a couple of things strike me about this, David. First of all is, well, you may not be an academic, but you are a journalist and you are the author of several books. So you're an expert. Not that I'm saying that should be necessarily the entry point. People have all kinds of different experiences and backgrounds, but for a university to claim that having someone of your background on campus is inappropriate it's just outright censorship. And I suppose the thing they object to about activist, or what activist means to them, is that you tell the truth. What they prefer a journalist is stenographer journalists, the ones who just write down whatever the Israeli army or the Dutch government tells them. And you definitely don't do that. And I just want to show this story that we published from 2022 that I just put in, Tamara, that this was from March 2022 when Dutch universities, I think it was the whole consortium of Dutch universities, collectively decided to completely cut all ties with Russia while continuing to censor their students and academics on behalf of the Israel lobby. But even at that point, it hadn't risen to outright bans. You wrote in your piece, David, that the Netherlands markets itself as one of the real bastions of free speech in Europe. Is that how does that weigh up against what you experienced?
The Netherlands, of course, does present itself as a liberal democracy, Ali, as you know. It's a liberal democracy that, well, that's obviously debatable whether it is a liberal democracy or not. What kind of a liberal democracy censors talks by activists and journalists? It's interesting that you mentioned a second ago, Ali, that the Dutch universities, including the University of Groningen, took a very strong stance against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In this particular instance, I'm told that the University of Groningen the administration argued that Gaza was too political for them to take a stance. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine, although that was clearly a political issue, was something in which they could take a very clear stance. However, they cannot, for some reason, take a clear stance against the genocide that is taking place right at this moment in Gaza. Perhaps one reason for that is that the University of Groningen is complicit in Israel's crimes. The University of Groningen has an official partnership with Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The Hebrew University of Jerusalem encroaches onto occupied Palestinian land in East Jerusalem and elsewhere in the West Bank. Hebrew University of Jerusalem runs programs in conjunction with the Israeli military, the very same military that is carrying out acts of genocide in Gaza at this moment. It even, I believe, undertakes combat training for the Israeli military on campus. This is an official partner of the University of Groningen. So perhaps it's not surprising that the university does not want such unsavory connections to be advertised.
And just let's put this up, Tamara. I just dropped another thing in the private chat. This is actually a letter from the heads of all of the Israeli universities, including the president of the Hebrew University, and it's dated 11th of October, and it's addressed to the presidents of universities around the world and calling on them to support Israel's genocide in Gaza. And they actually write, let's be clear, this is not war as usual or just another chapter in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are not good people on both sides. Hamas and Islamic Jihad have proven themselves to be cruel, barbaric organizations reminiscent of the Taliban and the Islamic State. And they urge everyone to support the war. So here are those Israeli universities which are partnered with the University of Groningen and others, actually spewing directly Israeli propaganda and talking points and dehumanizing Palestinians. But just, another point on this, David, is that if I'm correct, in the Netherlands in particular, you were going to speak about genocide and speaking up, not being silent about genocide. And this is one of the messages that the Dutch government is constantly harping on about in the context of Holocaust Memorial Day, because in fact, the Netherlands in Western Europe is the country where the highest proportion of its Jewish population was exterminated by the Nazis. And the reason that the Nazis had such success in exterminating the Jewish population of the Netherlands is because of the widespread collaboration by Dutch citizens and Dutch authorities. Yes, there certainly was a resistance in the Netherlands, but there was a lot of collaboration with the Nazis. So you would think that the one lesson that Dutch rulers and leaders and university heads would take away is that the time to break your silence is during a genocide.
Yes, three quarters of Dutch Jews were killed in the Holocaust. We're talking about over 100,000 people. I think 102,000 Jews were deported from the Netherlands and killed in Nazi camps. Fast forward to 2024. In the middle of the Gaza genocide, a national Holocaust museum was opened in the Netherlands. The guest of honor in inverted commas, at the opening of that event was Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, a man who was actually identified by the International Court of Justice in The Hague, in the Netherlands, as one of the individuals who demonstrated genocidal intent in comments he made in the early stages of the current war against Gaza. When he was in the Netherlands for the opening of that event, Mr. Herzog made a point of sitting down with Geert Wilders, the extreme right, the leader of the extreme right in the Netherlands. There's, if I may use my native Irish language for a second, there's an old Irish expression, Aithníonn Ciaróg, Ciaróg Ella, which roughly translates as, it takes one to know one. Isaac Herzog is presented by many as a kind of a moderate leader of Israel. Yet he doesn't hesitate for 1 second to embrace a racist, anti-Muslim bigot such as Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. In any event, the whole event was a weaponization of the Holocaust, an abuse of the Holocaust. The event that was banned in the Netherlands, the title of it was How Europe Enabled the Gaza Genocide. The poster of it actually had a picture, a photograph of Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission.
Frau Genocide.
She's not Dutch, she's German, but she's another person who has abused the Holocaust during the current genocide. In November last year, Ursula von der Leyen commemorated Kristallnacht, a horrible, historic, horrible episode of extreme violence against German Jews. She commemorated the anniversary of Kristallnacht by circulating a photograph of her at the Holocaust monument in Berlin, using the slogan, "Never again is now." The slogan, "Never again is now," means nothing unless you really mean that nobody should ever be subjected to a Holocaust ever again. While she was circulating that message, a Holocaust was being undertaken in Gaza. She and many other European Union leaders have facilitated that Holocaust. If we come back to the Netherlands just for 1 second. We talked for a second about the Netherlands positioning itself as a liberal democracy. Perhaps we can take a little bit of hope from the fact that in February, if memory serves me correctly, a court in the Netherlands ordered that parts for F-35 warplanes could not be shipped from the Netherlands to Israel. That indicates that there is at least an element of independence in the Dutch judiciary. There's no such independence when it comes to the Dutch government. The Dutch government, during that court case, argued that F-35 parts for F-35 warplanes should be sent to Israel because Israel needed such parts to defend itself. Israel does not have the right to defend itself. It's an occupier. Occupiers don't have rights. They have obligations. Israel has an obligation to get the hell out of Gaza and to end its apartheid system, to end its occupation of the West Bank. Unfortunately, the Dutch government is not prepared to make Israel honor that obligation. Instead, it is complicit in Israel's crimes.
Incredible. Thanks for your work, Dave, as always. Being the thorn in the side of the European Union and the European Commission officials, as always, and pointing out the genocidal hypocrisy of these leaders, especially in Europe. Again, Dave, your post on this is called "Why I Was Censored by a Dutch University." It's up now on the Electronic Intifada. Yep, there it is. Dave Cronin, thanks for your work. So good to see you.
Thanks very much,
Dave.
Thanks, Ali.
Yep. And just for those who don't know, Dave, along with Omar Ashtawy and Leah Caldwell, work very closely with all our writers in Gaza.
And Michael Brown.
And yeah, on the live stream, I'm forgetting, it's easy to forget things when you're live. But, just to say thank you to all of our editors, our feature editors who are helping every day to publish so many of those important and wonderful pieces from our contributors in Gaza, like Abubaker, who we just spoke to, and so many others. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. And you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada's live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah, and let's bring on Jon Elmer for his resistance report.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Jon.
Good show so far. Great to see Abubaker.
Yeah, he's a treasure. So you're going to take a look at the battles for al-Shifa, Nasser, and al-Amal hospitals, and you'll also analyze the most recent videos from the resistance in Gaza. Jon, take it away.
Yeah, well, as we know, the resistance report is based on hospitals right now, and I think it has been since the beginning of this war. I remember reporting back in November, in the first days of the ground war, following day by day, when we don't know where the Israelis were going in Gaza, but it looked immediately like they were pushing towards the hospitals as their primary objective. At the beginning of the ground operation, it took the Israelis 3 divisions, more than 30,000 troops, to get into Gaza City and they went straight for Shifa Hospital. In the north, they went for the hospitals in the north as well. And right now, as we are 180 days into the war, the only Israeli operations at this moment are focused on the hospitals. They just wrapped up the operation at Shifa Hospital, and they are still besieging Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis and al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis as well, in the same neighborhood of Khan Yunis. And as we heard from Abubaker, they are also bombing the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Darbala. So the focus of Israel's military push is on hospitals strictly, as we're seeing throughout this war. But now we have confirmation, because it's the only thing they're fighting for is the hospitals. Their chief of staff, Halevi, was in Shifa Hospital bragging about the operation at Shifa. And today, that was the other day, and today he's just photographed with his generals, with his commanders at Nasser Hospital, where the operation is going on today. So this is Israel attempting to have images of victory for their own people, where they sack these hospitals that had previously already been sacked. So in terms of a military strategy for the Israelis, the fact that they have to enter Shifa Hospital, where they told us the first time there was a massive command and control bunker under the hospital, which never materialized. But they have to raid the same hospital weeks later. In Khan Yunis, it was even quicker. Al-Amal Hospital was shut down by the Israelis. The Palestinians got it up, and within 10 days of the hospital being up, it's reinvaded again by the Israelis. So the target of these military operations, and it almost seems bizarre to be doing military breakdowns that are strictly based on hospitals, but here we are 180 days into this. So maybe we can show some of these pictures from Shifa Hospital. Nora did a great job in the introduction talking about Shifa Hospital. But on Sunday, the Israelis, which they have done previously, toured journalists through the hospital before the operation was over. And so these pictures here are from a Washington Post journalist who toured on Sunday. The Israelis left overnight on Sunday, Shifa Hospital. And you can see the buildings are all destroyed at Shifa Hospital. And you can see burn marks. There clearly have been burned, and that can happen from tank shelling. But when we go to these next pictures, and you can see the inside of the hospital here is completely destroyed. Palestinians are known for their ingenuity, but this hospital apparently looks like it's going to have to be completely rebuilt. So they've destroyed the most important medical center in the Gaza Strip, the largest hospital. They drove the 10,000 internally displaced peoples who were in the hospital out, and the people who remained in the hospital were too maimed and injured to get themselves out. And if you look at an image like this, what we're showing you now for the listening audience, we're looking at a completely charred building of the Shifa Hospital, completely burn-faced on the facade, completely burned. The Israelis have clearly, because you could see in the Washington Post images before that the burning wasn't this total on Sunday. And so they've gone, as they're leaving the hospital, the Israelis are torching the buildings. There's no military purpose. I don't need to be the one to tell you this, that there's no military purpose to burning the place down as you leave, to burning what amounts to a crime scene and burning people alive and dead inside the hospital. When the Washington Post visited on Sunday, they said they couldn't see a single Palestinian. Now we're looking at images from the early morning of Monday as the Israelis left, and hundreds of Palestinians are showing up into the courtyard that was previously the courtyard of the hospital. After the first Shifa raid in November, the courtyard became a mass grave, if we'll remember that. And so we know that that's a mass grave already from the first operation, and they're going to have to make another one for the second. The Israelis bulldozed people, ran over people alive. And the testimonials that will come out in the coming days from this brutal crime at Shifa Hospital, I think, will be well known to everybody. It's clear the Israelis have no intelligence on the ground in Gaza. They're raiding these hospitals because they're the only place that they can access. If Israel wanted a military image of victory and they had intelligence on the ground, they could raid military facilities and take pictures of them overrunning military facilities. But there's nothing like that. We don't see anything of the sort in Israel's field reports. We don't even see tunnel operations happening in Israeli reports anymore. But what we see is footage like this. This is just appalling footage from Shifa Hospital. And it shows that there's no strategy by the Israelis. The strategy is destruction. And this raid, the first raid into Shifa Hospital, it took them 3 weeks with 3 divisions to get into Gaza. And this time they're bragging because of the destruction of Gaza City and because, as I've reported previously, because of the Netzarim corridor that the Israelis are building to cut the Gaza Strip in half south of Gaza City. There's now effectively a military highway, as they're calling it, that runs from the Israeli border to the sea. And so they're able to raid the hospital in Shifa. This is the neighborhood that we're looking at now. They completely destroyed the neighborhood around the hospital because that's where the resistance was. The resistance put up a fight at Shifa Hospital. Last week, I showed you a dozen videos showing more than a dozen armored vehicles being blown up in the area of the hospital because the fight was in the neighborhood of the hospital, defending the hospital, not inside the hospital. And the Israelis themselves say that. The Washington Post tried to press the Special Forces commander, the colonel who we saw last week, speaking with his face hidden, the 𝐄𝐥𝐞 13, the Flotilla 13, the Israeli elite Navy SEALs who raided this hospital. He said that there was only dozens of fighters inside the hospital, and they're not even fighters. They're people who defended themselves in emptied buildings. Fighting in emptied buildings. They're not fighting over top of the maternity ward or fighting in the emergency ward. These are on the hospital campus being pressed by Israeli troops. And Ali talked about the doctors that were killed in front of their families. The World Health Organization talks about 21 patients that died. But the kind of accounting is very difficult to have at this point because the Israelis held the hospital for 2 weeks. And at the end of the first week, they'd said they'd killed 180 people. And at the end of the second week, they said the same number. So they're holding the hospital and fighting outside in the neighborhood. And that's what they did. We're looking here for the listening audience at a completely destroyed landscape as far as you can see around the hospital. And they did the same thing as they did in the hospital, around the hospital. They burnt the buildings. They showed on their TikTok videos their soldiers lighting up the buildings and burning them as they're leaving the neighborhood. These are not military tactics. These are there's no real other way to say it. They're serial killer tactics. They're burning evidence. They're destroying for the sake of destroying. And this is what's been happening for the past 2 weeks at Shifa. And it's been happening at Nasser Hospital as well. But the resistance has been fierce all around Shifa Hospital. This is going to turn out to be one of the biggest battles of the war. The Israelis are calling it that already. The number of attacks was more than 75 field reports. And we know that the previous time the Israelis re-invaded Gaza City was when they went into Zaytun neighborhood. And that was the Battle of Zaytun, which was one of the biggest battles as well. And so what we're seeing from the Israelis is just these raids and sacking of hospitals, dismantling of the healthcare system. And what we're seeing from the Palestinian resistance is the capability and ability to resist and to operate in cohesive units, still now 6 months on into this war. So there's no ability for Israel to say that they have victory over their fighters. We don't see any footage at all of the Israelis overrunning military positions and finding recent weaponry. All the weapons that we see the Israelis capturing for their photo ops are old AK-47s that are all over the Gaza Strip. They're not only in the hands of fighters, and we don't see any of the kind of weapons that we're going to talk about on the show today, or that we've talked about in these reports for the last 6 months. Palestinian weaponry built by their own hands. We would be seeing, if they were overrunning military positions, we would be seeing Yasin RPGs in lines. We haven't seen that at all. We would see weapons factories being uncovered where these weapons are built. The weapons that have built enough Yasins to fight for 6 months, enough rockets to fight for 6 months and not show any signs of depletion of these resources. We don't see any indication of these facilities being overrun at all. And so there's really no signs of victory for the Israelis. They talk about dismantling battalions, but that doesn't mean anything. They're talking about combat ineffective, which is a military term that denotes 1/3 of the fighting force is unable to fight. And that's what they're talking about, dismantling battalions, because they've said that they dismantled the battalions in the north, but they clearly didn't, because these battalions are who are fighting the last 2 weeks in one of the biggest battles of the war. So they're able to still mount the largest battles of the war 6 months on. So the brutal sight at Shifa, it's weird to even put it into a military report, because it doesn't have anything like a military impact. And the 𝐄𝐥𝐿 13, the Navy SEAL commander, the colonel, told the Washington Post, as they stood around the completely destroyed Shifa hospital, he said, "Look what they made us do." That kind of language. There's no signs of victory for the Israelis here. We're seeing signs of defeat. And nobody, I think, I don't want to speculate, but I think we can be pretty sure that nobody in months from now, in years from now, is going to talk about an Israeli military victory in Gaza. We're seeing a massacre of civilians, the dismantling of the public healthcare system, public education system, every university destroyed, schools destroyed, the Israelis using hospitals as bases and then burning them down as they leave, using universities as bases and then blowing them up as they leave, and putting them on TikTok, as we saw with Isra University most starkly. But all the universities are involved, and anytime we have guests from Gaza talking about that, they always talk about their universities, where they were in their degrees, and these schools don't exist anymore at all because of this operation. There's the military justification for carrying out a genocide on this level is enormous, and there's no signs of anything like that from the Israelis. So let's take a look at some of the videos from the resistance. This is a Soraya al-Quds video. We could do number 1 here tomorrow. This is a Soraya al-Quds video around the hospital. This is a Nasser troop carrier that we're seeing in between the buildings. We're seeing here multiple camera angles of this vehicle. Nasser troop carrier with 12 soldiers. You could see the trophy active protection system on the top of that vehicle there. And you can also see at the back, and here's a Soraya al-Quds fighter with a Yasin 105 firing on that troop carrier that has, and there we're seeing the camera on the barrel of the Yasin. Just to point out, it's interesting to note, and I pointed it out on last week's show as well, we're seeing Soraya al-Quds fighters, Islamic Jihad fighters, fighting with Yasin 105s, the Qassam army built weapon. And this Soraya al-Quds Islamic Jihad fighter in this video is using a Yasin 105, and it's painted black, suggesting that Soraya al-Quds has a stock of these weapons too, now that they're using here later in the war. This footage that we're seeing also indicates, just just looking around at the footage we're seeing, you see total destruction, blown out buildings that have no military purpose, because we're seeing that these blown out buildings can become simple sniper positions, observation points, surveillance points. We're watching here the same video from 3 different angles because we have multiple cameramen. They're showing the triangle there of a soldier poking his head out of the hatch of the Namr troop carrier. And there you see a very good shot of the Yasin 105 with the tandem charged warhead, 2 warheads on it. We'll talk more about that later on, but you can see Saraya al-Quds using that weapon. And so we're seeing, again, 3 different angles of this shot. Now we're going down into the streets with a unit who's moving through the streets, because the Israelis don't come out of their tanks. They're not dismounted. The tanks are all parked in the parking lot, in the courtyard, in the graveyard that is Shifa Hospital. And the soldiers aren't trying to clear this neighborhood block by block in any kind of military procession, a logic. We're just seeing them sitting inside their vehicles, shelling the hospital and destroying the neighborhood from the air and from tank shelling. But spotters in multiple places, and in this footage, they fighters down on the street are carrying out machine gun operations, light machine gun operations down on the street. And again, just to see the footage of these destroyed buildings and the way that the neighborhood has been destroyed has no military purpose, because it's difficult for the armored vehicles to move through the neighborhood when the streets are destroyed like this. The tracks on their vehicles can't handle the broken concrete. And so we see there the Yasin fighter. And there's another video, number 2, Tamara, is also a Saraya al-Quds video from the neighborhood of Shifa Hospital. And here we're watching, again, Saraya al-Quds, Islamic Jihad. Their videos, they let us go a little bit longer with their fighters. Their crops aren't so tight. And you can see them within 50 meters of an Israeli Merkava tank. And the fighter using a tandem 105, which is a Gaza-built weapon that made all of their previous warheads from the previous generation. They added a second charge to them to make them more effective against the increased Israeli armor. So we're seeing fighters moving through the neighborhood of Shifa because the Israelis are hiding in their tanks. Palestinians are able to get these kind of shots away at soldiers in their armored vehicles that are not dismounted. The Israelis have acknowledged 3 casualties in the Shifa Hospital raids, multiple from their armored brigade, which suggests that they were inside their armored vehicles when they were hit. We could go to number 4 here, Tamara, because we can see in this one, this is Qassam mortar teams operating, and we're still seeing mortar teams operating in conjunction with each other. We're about to see, this is the Qassam Brigade's video. We're about to see 5 separate mortar units operating in synchronicity, in unison, during the defense of Shifa Hospital. And these weapons are also built by the Palestinians. And this is a sign he's showing us here as he's loading the mortars into his mortar launcher. And the sign shows what the date is. They're showing the date that the video is published, showing us that they're still getting these videos out within, literally within minutes, within hours of these operations. They're not holding these for days and giving us a best of. And that's what we see on these fighters, showing on placards what the date is, what the location is, what unit is firing. And so we're seeing 5 different Qassam units here. And now Qassam, in part of their military development, at the beginning of the Second Intifada, their weapons industry focused on getting mortars developed, developing their own mortars to carry out a strategy at the time. While there was Israeli settlements inside the Gaza Strip, the Qassam units, the Qassam military apparatus, the military development decided that the need was to create mortars for part of its anti-settlement strategy, the way that the Qassam brigades during the Second Intifada, all of the Palestinian resistance, but particularly the professionalization of the Qassam brigades starts with the Second Intifada. And they developed their own mortar shells to fire on the Israeli settlements, which ultimately made the settlements impossible to defend for the Israelis through a number of tactics, not just mortars, all kinds of sophisticated military operations that carried out for the 5 years from the beginning of the Second Intifada in 2000 until the Israeli withdrawal in 2005. So we're seeing, we saw Saraya al-Quds, Islamic Jihad using Gaza-based weapons to fight. We're seeing Qassam here, mortar teams using Gaza-made mortars. And this last fighter here, he's going to tell us to the camera after this unit fires here. The last fighter says that if Netanyahu thinks that by killing and starving our children, we will deviate from our path, that we will surrender, that he's already lost. And that's what we're seeing this fighter here talking to the camera saying as he launches mortar rounds from his position. So Qassam makes their own 60 millimeter, 81 millimeter, and 120 millimeter mortars that we're seeing used effectively here during the battle. Maybe we go to number 3 here, Tamara. This is another interesting development, another Gaza-made development. This is the buried rocket launchers that the Palestinians have vexed the Israelis with throughout this 6 months, because the Israelis can't find where these rocket launchers are, even though they're moving their troops over this land. They're literally moving their armored vehicles over top of tunnel-fed rocket launchers that the Palestinian resistance has fired, more than 12,000 rockets. That's the last number that we got from the Israelis, was 12,000, and that was in the middle of January. Admittedly, rocket fire is down since then, but that number 12,000, going into the war, Israeli intelligence told us publicly that there was 10,000 rockets in Gaza. So they were clearly wrong about that, because the Palestinians still have the ability to fire rockets, and Islamic Jihad here is showing us one of the ways that they do that, which is the rocket launchers are buried and the rocket unit comes out. He literally, for people listening, we're watching him take a hoe and dig out the topsoil and access this multiple rocket launcher that's launching Islamic Jihad built Grad rockets. And so Islamic Jihad is showing us this, interestingly, 6 months into the war. And here the fighters loading the fuse on the top, showing that these rockets are active. And on this video, they also tell us the time that they're going to launch the rockets. And then they do launch them. And for the Israelis, there's the time he's saying when they're going to launch it. And you can see him at his command post there. And now we're seeing the rockets launched at the time that they said they would be launched at southern Israel. So this is one of more than 12,000 rocket launches against Israel. Maybe we can go to 3B here tomorrow, because this is Qassam showing us that they also have rockets. This is from a couple weeks back, but I wanted to just show this because this is the Qassam brigades showing M75 rockets that can reach Tel Aviv, and they're showing them armed and ready to fire. And they're showing them how these rockets are used. This is a buried, underground, tunnel-fed, tunnel-borne rocket launching system. And coming into the war, in the first days of the war, the outgoing Gaza, the deputy of the Gaza command, of the Gaza division of the Southern Command, said that there was more than 1,000 tunnel-fed rocket launching sites. And so we're looking at one of those now. Qassam still has the capacity throughout this war to show us these on video that can be used at any time. And we haven't seen as many Qassam rockets fired lately. My guess is that that's because they're holding back their their stocks at this point because of this interim period. But they're showing us here that they still have this capacity. And I'm sure we're going to see at the end of the war, along with the parade of fighters, that they're going to be able to launch rockets on the last day of the war in the same way that they did on the first day. And we'll remember that this operation began with 4,000 rockets launched on October 7th, which matches the number, virtually matches the number of the entire 2006 war, and also a similar number to the 2014 war in Gaza, the 2006 war with Hezbollah. So these facilities, these rocket facilities still exist. They're underground. The Israelis haven't been able to reach them. And if Israel was actually fighting to dismantle the Qassam brigades, they would be underground fighting and reaching these spots after 6 months. But there's no indication that the Israelis had any intention on fighting in the tunnels. And they haven't done that, though we watch every day to see, because we know, and we said it on October 9th on this show, that there's no way to dismantle the Qassam brigades without a fight in the tunnels, which history has never seen before in a military context, to see a full-scale battle in the apparently 500 miles of tunnels that the Qassam brigades and al-Quds have underneath the Gaza Strip. So these videos were from the north. Tomorrow, if we can go to number 5, this is also I'm going to show you this operation in Khan Yunis that happened at Nasser Hospital. So we're seeing here an Israeli position right beside the hospital. The footage just showed us the on the wall, it says Nasser Hospital Medical Complex right beside, and we're seeing the Israeli position with their curtains drawn, being hit by a thermobaric warhead, a TBG, the Qassam built weapon. And if we could just skip maybe to the next one tomorrow, and then we'll come back to this one again. I want to show you this weapon, the thermobaric grenade. And this is also a Palestinian innovation, because their thermobaric warhead has is a tandem charge as well, like the other Yasin warheads, and you can see the fighter there putting it on his Yasin. And so if we look at that, we can see that there's 2 charges, there's 2 bulges on that weapon. The top charge is an anti-fortification that will, as we're seeing here, blow a hole in the wall, and the second charge is a fuel. The thermobaric is a fuel charge, which is a devastating weapon when used. And now if we go back to the previous one tomorrow, we can see that this is the weapon being used, a Qassam built weapon being used against the force. There we see it's a Nasser hospital, and we see a special force. This is a commando brigade. This is the EGOS unit. This is actually this unit, the Israelis, this is their guerrilla warfare, irregular warfare unit. And we see them being hit, and the pressure of the thermobaric blast blows the windows out completely out of these out of this position. And the Israelis had to admit casualties in this. This was a mass casualty incident. 2 special forces soldiers were killed, 16 were wounded, 6 seriously wounded, and on this operation outside of Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, where the Israelis are setting up a base to occupy the hospital and to shut it down, just as they did with al-Amal hospital just down the road from what we're looking at here, where the Israelis dismantled the hospital and then bulldozed berms around the hospital so that nobody could access the hospital anymore. And this operation in Khan Yunis, 2 days before what we're watching right here, the thermobaric attack on the Israeli special forces, the chief of staff Halevi bragged about the insertion operation in Khan Yunis. So they're bragging about an insertion operation for their forces 5 months into this war in Khan Yunis, because the Israelis invaded Khan Yunis in early December and still have to, an insertion operation implies that they had to bring the forces in, that there wasn't a direct route into this operation at first. And so they inserted troops separate from their ground operation, which they have now 4 full months of fighting in Khan Yunis, and they still have to carry out an insertion operation. But Halevi actually bragged about this, the chief of staff. He called this, and he put 3 very, very, very high level of combat. And then the next day, 36 hours later, his guerrilla force, his special operations force, his AGOS unit, special forces here we have 16 casualties in one single event, which for a guerrilla warfare unit is not fighting like guerrillas to have 16 soldiers in a single place. But interestingly, this is a hit on their special forces unit. So this is how the battles for these hospitals are going. The Israelis are paying a significant price for these operations, and we know that they're not telling us all about their casualties. And I just have one more video here to show you, to prove to you that they're not counting their casualties. If we go to number 6 here, Tamara, this is a Hezbollah operation in the north, in Lebanon, across the Lebanese border here. And we're going to see footage of this. We're seeing footage from a thermal camera, and the circle here that we're looking at the border fence on the western side of the Lebanon-Israel border. Hezbollah has circled here, and you can see in the thermal imaging the soldiers choosing which building to go to. They're running back and forth between which building as the missile strike comes in, and they chose the wrong building and are clearly hit there by Hezbollah fire. And no casualty reports from the north on this operation. This is one of 1,300 Hezbollah operations since October 8th, when the war started. This is one of 40 on a command position. So if we again look here, you can see in the thermal imaging the soldiers moving from one building to the next. Here, it looks like at least half a dozen of them. And then halfway through, they change their mind and go back to the previous building. You could see them running back across to the previous building, once again changing their mind and going back to the original building moments before it's struck directly by what is presumably anti-tank fire, although Hezbollah didn't say, and it's not possible to confirm that. But it is possible to confirm that the Israelis had no casualties reported from that operation. And it's worth noting that Hezbollah indicates that there have been 2,000 casualties between wounded and killed in the northern front alone, according to their numbers. The Israeli numbers, still no clear Israeli numbers now, 6 months into this war. So that is what we've seen. And again, just to point out, all the videos that we just showed are all from since you last saw me. And if we were to bring together the videos of the Shifa operation, which we'll do, reorganize these videos after the war and show them in a different way. At this point, we're still reporting day by day on the ground battle. And so we know that last week's show, I showed you a dozen videos from the fight around Shifa Hospital, a few more today, that shows able, courageous resistance continuing in these areas that the Israelis have long ago said that they had operational control and clearly have nothing of the sort. So that is the resistance report for today.
Incredible. Thank you so much, as always, for, as I say, your meticulous curation of what people usually are not seeing during this genocide. Thank you so much, Jon. Did Ali or Asa, did you have any questions about any of the videos? I saw some of our commenters asking what the thing was that was being blown out or like sucked out of the window during that blast around.
Yeah, so the way the thermobaric warhead is that it's a fuel explosion, so it sucks the air out of the room and then sends a pressure blast out. And so that pressure blast is blowing the windows out, but it's also very costly for anyone in the vicinity, because that pressure blast can kill you a number of ways, collapsing your organs, your internal organs. And also, once the explosion happens, it's a fuel explosion, so it's a brutal fire. And so the 16 casualties in that incident, and you could say that that is the Israelis getting lucky in that circumstance to only have those casualties. It's a devastating weapon that the Palestinians have created on their own in the Gaza Strip. All the weapons that I showed you today are created in the Gaza Strip. They're clones of other weapons, but created by Palestinians in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, it is just extraordinary to see them still fighting, and you have to think that all those fighters, they have families or had families who they probably haven't seen since before this genocide started, and yet they are still fighting with morale against what the whole world can see as a absolutely barbaric enemy that has no red lines, none whatsoever, not hospitals, not aid workers, not children, not the elderly, nothing, not doctors, not journalists. And they are really the only defense people in Gaza have, because we can see that very few governments are doing anything substantial to help the resistance, which is a fully legitimate struggle against an invading, occupying, genocidal army.
Yeah.
I've got one question for Jon. It's an issue that we've addressed before, but it's perhaps worth reiterating the sources for all these videos that we put out, Jon.
Yeah, these videos are released by the resistance. They're released on Telegram channels. They're made public. The resistance wants these videos to be seen. The fact that they're not seen in the Western media is the only reason they may seem like they're secret videos to people in English language media. But for example, Al Jazeera shows these videos in a massive studio with floor to ceiling video projection of them. And so the resistance wants these videos to be seen. We see the care that they take in the videos, blurring certain areas. So they clearly, and they blur all their fighters, even after, even if their fighters are killed, they still are blurring all of their fighters. And Qassam has not been announcing their casualties because of the way that the Israelis are just targeting their families. So they haven't been announcing their casualties. But in terms of these videos, the resistance wants these videos to be seen. They publicly publish them. They embed within their units these cameramen in order for us to see these videos, and in order for us to break down these videos and show you what's actually happening in the battle. That's what the resistance is publishing these videos for. And none of my information comes from anything other than open source, publicly available information. A lot of what I do is put pieces together, take what the Israelis are saying. I track the Israeli field reports and the Palestinian field reports and try to overlap them to put the pieces together. And general understanding of military strategy and tactics to articulate what's happening. But these videos are intended. The resistance puts these videos out to be seen. They're expected to be seen widely if possible. So
and we know the Israelis don't watch them because otherwise they would be staying away from windows.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, jokes aside, we do know that they do watch them. We've seen the Israelis match videos. Like, for example, when they announced the mass casualty event in Khan Yunis, they're looking for videos to match that mass casualty event. And the resistance in Khan Yunis was able to publish that video before, because there was chatter whenever there's these mass casualty events, there's chatter on the Israeli networks that something extraordinary has happened. And in these moments, the resistance is able to put out a video showing that they clearly have command and control. They still have their media ops in full effect, and they're able to put out the information ahead of the Israelis. And they show that the Israelis have shown previously that we know that tank crew that have been blown up inside their tanks and injured have found the videos that those events happened in and said, this was the video of the event that happened to me. Whether they're learning on the ground, their soldiers are learning on the ground to, for example, stay out of windows or not put curtains up, or to carry out these basic training things that would be taught to soldiers in basic training. These are not advanced. I mean, I think even just generally people are aware that standing in a window is a bad idea. So it's not clear how much lesson learned they're getting from the videos themselves. But the Israelis are, of course, watching these videos. They're probably that's their only window into what's happening, because they don't have any intelligence on the ground. And these, I guess we're going to talk about the World Central Kitchen, just proof that they don't have any eyes and ears on the ground at all within the Palestinian population. And that's something that the Qassam brigades, that's 20 years. I mean, it's 30 years if you go back to the beginning of counterintelligence operations that the Qassam brigades have run. In fact, the Qassam brigades' first military formation was a counterintelligence operation, was to root out collaborators in the first Intifada. That was their first first strategy of the resistance, was to eliminate that collaborator class that was so devastating and murderous to Palestinians. And now 20, 30 years on, you see the fruits of that in their military tactics, because the Israelis don't have any way of confirming anything that's happening on the ground. They're not even able to say, I mean, they're bragging at this point about the assassination of Marwan Issa, top commander of the Qassam brigades, but they don't have any intelligence to prove that is the case. There's nobody on the ground to do even basic observations.
And if they had any evidence of that, they would show it.
They would show all. That's the point, Ali. They would, if they had actual evidence of any of this stuff, not only would they show it, they would show it immediately. They would make a really big deal out of it. Instead, all we see is footage from drones of pixelated people that we're told are Hamas. For example, in the Khan Yunis video where the drone killed the 4 civilians, clear civilians, with clear footage of them being killed in Khan Yunis, the Israelis released video of the day that happened, on the day, the original day in February, when those 5 civilians were killed. The Israelis put out a video that was grainy, thermal imaging from a higher up drone, and they said this is 4 or 5 Qassam fighters, Hamas fighters that are killed. So there's no intelligence and there's no military strategy to this destruction. They're just destroying the place as a terror tactic to try to get the population to never resist again. This is not a dismantling of the fighting force in any meaningful way.
No.
John, I see a question from Dr. E. Ibrahim, and he's asking about the report about possible spies infiltrating the aid trucks. And I think this is a reference to the statement put out by the resistance a few days ago that they had captured, I think it was about 10 members of the Palestinian Authority security forces, or people sent by the Palestinian Authority security forces. We're talking about the Israeli-aligned, Israeli-backed, US-backed Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. And this was reportedly there's very little solid information about this, but it is reported to be an operation organized by Majid Faraj, who is the head of the intelligence service for the Mahmoud Abbas traitor regime, as I call them, and that this was based on coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority in an Arab capital, which has not been named. And according to the resistance, the Interior Ministry in Gaza captured these men and has taken them for investigation or questioning. And they've said that they would treat these kinds of attempts as, they would treat people involved in these kinds of attempts the same as they treat the occupation forces. Now, there's a lot that it's impossible to confirm about this at this point, but I don't have any reason to doubt that they infiltrated, that they captured these infiltrators, even if we don't know all the details. But I just want to comment on that this speaks to the earlier point about the resistance continuing to have command and control in Gaza, that the Interior Ministry is still functioning, the government information office is still functioning. Israel has continued to attack, of course, the civil police to prevent aid distribution and so on. But there does still seem to be, a functioning counterintelligence or security system in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to comment on the specificity of that, but I think that would be that the messaging from Hamas is to indicate that they have that still on the ground, and that these kind of operations, the attempt, even if there was in the future attempts to put some sort of collaborator regime on the ground, that the Qassam brigades and the internal security have the capacity to out this. We know that there's been reports of them battling with some of the clan, the large family, criminal families that the Israelis have used for decades to sow discord in the Gaza Strip, that the Qassam brigades rooted out as part of their 15 years of being in government, that the Israelis had used these forces. And you've said it, like Majid Faraj, he is the intelligence minister of the PA. He was the one who was responsible for the coup attempt against Hamas in 2006 after the elections, and under the auspices of the U.S. General Keith Dayton. Faraj was part of that project to dismantle Hamas in the West Bank. After their attempt was to begin to dismantle Hamas after the election, but as soon as the first shots were fired, Qassam overran the collaborator regime and took over control of the Gaza Strip in 2007. And so I think that these are signs, without commenting on that specific case, because I'm not sure. That would be, for the PA, that would be such a bold move to attempt to put foreigners from outside Gaza on the ground as some kind of Trojan horse, is just an indication that they don't have those people on the ground to effectively do that kind of collaborator work. It shows that the Palestinian security forces are still intact. And the point of it is, if Israel didn't massacre them, those forces on the ground could facilitate aid shipments into the Gaza Strip. But Israel killed those people, has killed them, and made it impossible for that to happen. And so that's part of Israel's claim to say that there's nobody on the ground, but that they've been dismantled on the ground.
Right, but also we've seen, and this has been true over the last 6 months, but there have been renewed reports in the media just over the last few days. For example, there was a story, I think it was in the Times of Israel, about using the delivery of humanitarian aid as the vehicle to bring in so-called Arab peacekeeping forces without specifying the countries. People have speculated, and again, we've talked about this before, but including the Palestinian Authority. And we know that the United States, if not Israel, is very keen to get the Palestinian Authority back into Gaza. And so in any case, that's that's about that. But I suppose that is a transition to the thank you, Tamara.
Because that's the implication, is that has to happen for Israel to carry out this next phase that they're dreaming of. They have to have some kind of collaborator regime on the ground that is going to accept this project, and all of these dreams of the Israelis and selling beachfront properties or having foreign governments coming in and foreign capitals to negotiate who's going to be the aid delivery people, all presume that Israel has total control and that the fighting forces have been eliminated. In other words, you have to win the war for this to happen, and there's no indication that that's the case. So we have all this speculation who's going to be the one to do it, because it presumes unless Israel is the one doing it, that it presumes that there will have to be some kind of other force that Israel allows, and that won't get massacred, because anyone else trying to secure aid gets massacred. And that's what we've seen, just a transition to the World Central Kitchen. That we've seen what Israelis are calling friendly fire against their own aid organization. It shows you that they're massacring them as well. Let's
talk about World Central Kitchen. It's on a lot of people's minds. And first, let me just point to our colleague Tamara Nasser did a really great background piece on World Central Kitchen that's up at the Electronic Intifada and published earlier today. And I just want to talk about some of the things I've been looking into and seeing. Some of this is in Tamara's article, but there are other things that have been coming up that I've been looking at. I mean, the first thing to say is that to express nothing but sympathy and horror for the murders of the 7 people associated with World Central Kitchen, who are clearly targeted, and they include Saifuddin Abu Taha, a Palestinian from Gaza, and Zomi Frankham, a longtime aid worker with World Central Kitchen from Australia. And there are 3 British people who've been identified as former members of the British military, special services, who have been identified by World Central Kitchen as part of their security team. And there is Damian Sobol, a relief worker from Poland who has a history with World Central Kitchen. And the 7th person is Jacob Flickinger, a dual US-Canadian citizen. And we're just learning now, he's identified as part of the relief team. We've just learned while we've been on air, really, that he is a former member of the Canadian military who was deployed in Afghanistan prior to 2019. And he doesn't appear to have a long history with World Central Kitchen, but what's coming out in the media now is that he did previously go on a mission with them in Mexico after the major hurricane there last year. So that's what we've learned about these people. And I've been looking into their backgrounds because I want to know who they are. And I want to be clear that, there's a lot of sort of speculation about why are former British Special Forces people in Gaza. Does this indicate something bigger? And I've also been contacted by international journalists who I respect, who've said to me, it's very common for major news organizations or relief agencies to hire these types of former military people for security. And these 3 British military people work for a company called Solace Global, which is based in Poole in Dorset. It's quite opaque. It's founded by another former British Special Forces person called David Peach. There's very little information about him I could find. His photo, the senior team page on the Solace Global website does not even list his name or show his photo. I couldn't find a photo of him anywhere, although he is listed in the UK Companies Registry as the principal of this company. So that's to say there are some sort of weird questions about this, but I don't think that should be our focus necessarily, because yes, it's plausible that these are just security people, although the question then arises, were they armed? Did Israel allow them to bring weapons in? And that by itself would be very unusual. But I don't want to say, I don't want that to be the focus, because I really think the bigger questions about World Central Kitchen are the ones we should focus on. And here I want to sort of go back to what we know about World Central Kitchen and the role it has been playing in Gaza, and why I think we should be quite wary of this organization, even though we express horror for the murder of these 7 individuals who certainly did not in any way deserve that fate. But let's go back to October 16th. Of course, people will know that World Central Kitchen is headed or figureheaded by this celebrity chef from Spain called Jose Andres. And let's go back, Tamara, if we can show the tweet that I did, or at least the media in it, of his tweet from October 16th of this year. This is Jose Andres, the founder of World Central Kitchen, and this is in Spanish, but I'll summarize what he's saying here, and that there's a longer message than is shown on the screen. But he is responding to Yona Balara, who is a Spanish minister who on October 16th expressed utter horror at Israel's bombardment and massacres of Palestinians in Gaza that had already killed thousands of people, the majority of them women or children. Remember, this is now 9 days after the events of October 7th. And what Jose Andres is expressing outrage at the minister for saying this, and saying that what Israel is doing in Gaza is defending its citizens. So he is justifying the genocide as Israel defending its citizens. And when I posted this, I had some people come back to me and say, oh, he can be forgiven because, it was the early days and people didn't know what was going on, and maybe he was naive or he wasn't paying attention. No, these are excuses. Let's remember, the minister there who he's responding to is saying exactly what's happening. And he actually demands that she be fired for standing up against Israel's barbarity. And this tweet, the reason I mentioned the date, October 16th, is because a day before this, so on October 15th, 2023, 800 international genocide scholars had published a statement warning about genocide in Gaza, and that included prominent Holocaust scholars. So the reason I'm pointing this out is because Jose Andres knew this or should have known it, and there's no excuse for that. And I do not want to permit anyone to rewrite history and say, oh, we didn't know. There were already people screaming from the rooftops that this was genocide, while Jose Andres, celebrity chef Jose Andres, was defending Israel's attack on Gaza. Now, then we have to ask, how come World Central Kitchen was permitted by the Israelis to go into Gaza while other humanitarian aid, particularly UNRWA, is being kept out or impeded by Israel? Hundreds, thousands of trucks lined up, unable to get in, and yet World Central Kitchen is allowed to come in by land, apparently, and by sea. And remember what happened to the Mavi Marmara when it tried to reach Gaza by sea. Israel massacred people on that ship. And let's take a look at the reporting from the New York Times this is a couple of weeks ago. These are just a few highlights that the Israeli military helped World Central Kitchen's operation, providing security and coordination. And they actually helped World Central Kitchen. The Israeli military helped World Central Kitchen build a jetty out of the rubble of people's homes destroyed by the Israeli military. And there may still, some people were saying there may still have been bodies in that rubble that had not been recovered, that was being used to build World Central Kitchen's jetty. And even after this attack, so before and after the attack by the Israelis, what is being called friendly fire against World Central Kitchen's team, the Israeli military has been saying, oh, we love World Central Kitchen, their work is vital, and, you know, please forgive us, it was an accident. Of course, it wasn't an accident, but the Israelis continue to express support for World Central Kitchen while blocking UNRWA. And this is the thing I want to point out, because as you can see there, that sentence in the New York Times, in a venture that Western officials hope will play a part in easing the enclave's food deprivation. Well, why is there food deprivation in Gaza? It's because Israel is keeping the trucks out, keeping UNRWA out. So if Israel wanted to ease the, if the Western officials, whoever they are, wanted to ease the starvation in Gaza, if Israel wanted to ease the starvation in Gaza, it's really easy. All you've got to do is stop impeding the aid convoys. Yesterday, our friend Chris Gunnis, the former spokesperson from UNRWA, who we've had on this live stream, tweeted about how once again Israel has blocked an UNRWA aid convoy into northern Gaza, where the starvation is at its worst. And a week ago, Israel announced that it would not allow any more UNRWA aid convoys into northern Gaza. The United States has still not restored its funding to UNRWA. Germany, the second biggest donor after the United States, has still not restored its funding to UNRWA. So the suspicion here is that, and I think with good reason, that World Central Kitchen was being used as an effort to replace UNRWA, but not to replace UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, with an adequate substitute, but to replace it with a PR operation so that people in Canada, people in Britain, people in Italy, people in other countries will say, oh, something is being done and people are being fed. But we had Abubaker Abed, and we didn't know he was going to say that. We didn't ask him about World Central Kitchen. We didn't say to him, we want you to talk about it. He spontaneously came on this live stream and said that, you know, to the extent that World Central Kitchen is there, it is a drop in the ocean, and people are not getting what they need. You know, World Central Kitchen is reportedly providing, I don't know what it is. Let's be generous and say 100,000 meals a day in Gaza. There are 2.3 million people in Gaza. If everyone in Gaza only needs to eat once, you need 2.3 million meals a day. But people in Gaza need to eat more than once a day. So we're talking about millions upon millions of meals per day. And the only agency that is able to provide that is UNRWA, the one that Israel is blocking, the one that the United States and Germany are defunding in order to bring down its operations. So we have to be really suspicious about what World Central Kitchen is up to. And the point is this, because I've had pushback about this. People say to me, but Ali, something is better than nothing. You know, you see the images of World Central Kitchen feeding people, handing food to people. Do you not want those people to eat? Of course I want them to eat. Would I begrudge to people in Gaza to get a hot meal from any source? Of course not. But the point is, when you see those public relations images of a few people eating, what you are not seeing is the far greater number of people the millions of people being starved because UNRWA is being sabotaged and destroyed by Israel and the United States deliberately. And then yesterday we got the news that President Biden personally called Jose Andres, Chef Jose Andres, to offer his condolences and support after the murder by Israel, probably with weapons provided by Joe Biden himself, of these 7 workers. And then, has Joe Biden ever called the head of UNRWA? More than 150 UNRWA workers have been murdered by Israel since the start of this genocide. I never heard that Joe Biden called the head of UNRWA and offered his condolences. On the contrary, Joe Biden continues to do everything he can to sabotage UNRWA. And US spokespersons continue to smear UNRWA. So there is something very suspicious going on here with World Central Kitchen. And I'll point this out. On March, because Palestinians know this and they talk about this, even if we're not talking about it in the rest of the world, people understood World Central Kitchen. How was this boat from World Central Kitchen allowed? Why is Israel helping World Central Kitchen build a jetty or a pier or whatever it was? This has justifiably raised suspicions among Palestinians that this is all a Trojan horse to bring in some sort of alternative to UNRWA, maybe some new form of Palestinian Authority collaborationist regime under the cover of humanitarian support, under the cover of a humanitarian charity that is extremely close to the White House. How close is it to the White House? Well, you just heard that Joe Biden called Jose Andres personally, but let's take a look at this video from February. This is a propaganda video put out by the White House that shows Jose Andres meeting with Doug Emhoff, who is called the second gentleman. He's the husband of Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States, to promote a Joe Biden political initiative. And there's Jose Andres. That's how close he is to the White House. And this agency, World Central Kitchen, this just charity, has gone from like nothing 3 years ago to raising $519 million, $500 billion in 2022, according to its latest available filings with the United States government.
$500 million, not half a trillion.
$500 million, and that they went from a few million like 5 years ago to $500 million right now, and this and all of this comes as the efforts to dismantle and destroy UNRWA escalate. So these are the things that I think we have to pay attention to with this story.
Yeah.
I've just got a couple of numbers here too, just for people to get a little bit of perspective. There were on that barge, the World Central Kitchen barge with the jetty, there was 12 trucks of aid on that barge. All of the airdrops that happened in the first 3 weeks of March added up to 50 trucks airdropped. The Israeli concentration camp guards at this moment are saying that they can process 45 trucks an hour crossing the border on the land crossing. So 12 trucks on the barge, 50 trucks total for all the airdrops. And the Israelis themselves are saying that they can process 45 trucks an hour. And we know before that the siege level, the starvation level that Dr. G was talking about, the caloric intake measurements under the siege was 500 trucks a day.
Minimum.
So
yeah.
These are really propaganda stunts. If they're not Trojan horses for something far worse, they're at least propaganda stunts that are glossing over the fact that the ground crossings are the way to get aid into the starving people of Gaza who are in desperate circumstances and don't have weeks and months to debate or to figure out alternative methods. The aid distribution networks in Gaza exist and have existed and have been eliminated by the Israelis. There's no substitute for them. And these numbers are the airdrops and the barges. They're just smoke and mirrors.
And John, and actually one of the statements on World Central Kitchen's website that I read actually says that they were able to get some trucks in, which suggests that the Israelis are preferentially allowing World Central Kitchen to bring trucks in while continuing to impede and block the far vaster amounts of aid that other agencies are trying to bring in. And what I wanted to say earlier, I sort of went off in another direction, but a very important point is that, I mean, a question people are asking as well, if these people are working with Israel, why would Israel attack them? And that's the big question. And I think that there are a couple of possible answers. One, which comes from the Israeli military itself. You know, they claim, oh, it was a deconfliction era. But a story in Haaretz last night actually includes leaks from the Israeli army claiming that the reason is because there's just no discipline. There's no command and control, and the commanders on the ground do whatever they want. Well, that's very plausible because we know that they do. Another possibility, I mean, this is speculative, is that a couple of days before this attack, World Central Kitchen had tried to distance itself publicly from the suspicion that it was being used as a Trojan horse to replace UNRWA. And they actually put out a statement saying, we're not there to replace any agency. We work with UNRWA, we work with 𝐄𝐥𝐞, which is another UN agency, and with other groups on the ground. And 2 days later, Israel kills their people. I wonder, I mean, this is speculative, but could that have been a message from Israel, which is that if you're going to work here, you do it under our rules, and you don't work with UNRWA, and you don't talk nicely about UNRWA or anyone else? I don't know. And then another possibility, whether intended or not, what this has done is consolidate the legitimacy and popularity of World Central Kitchen. So there's an effective rallying around. Let's do more to support World Central Kitchen and get them into Gaza. And that sympathy for the murdered workers translates into more political support for World Central Kitchen. Maybe it's too Machiavellian to suggest that the Israelis did that deliberately, but that's certainly one of the dangerous unintended effects of this.
And as well, as I mentioned in the live report, and as Tamara reported in her post that was just published, it is, the killing of the aid workers has prompted other agencies like ANERA to turn their ships around and go back to Cyprus. While aid, the couple of tons of aid that could have been delivered through other organizations like ANERA is now on hold. Meanwhile, the thousands of aid trucks at the crossings are still not being let in. So it's exacerbating an already precarious situation for people who, are starving. And it's not the brink of famine anymore. People are starving across Gaza.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points I want to make about this. The first is just to show, related to the question that Ali related, that is being asked by people, that, if World Central Kitchen is so close to the Israelis, then why would the Israelis deliberately target them? let's not forget, like, what the Israelis have been doing to their own civilians, and even in some cases soldiers, since the 7th of October, which is mass Hannibal, which is, in the words of the Israeli military, an immense amount of friendly fire. And there was a new statement by a new Israeli spokesperson to the English language media, which his name is David Mensa, which was made yesterday. So we've got the video clip of that. If you could play that tomorrow now.
Including one Australian, have been killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, demanding full accountability, calling in the ambassador to explain. That hasn't happened yet. But let's go live to Tel Aviv now. Joining us is the Israeli government spokesperson, David Mensa. David, thanks for your time this evening, Why was a marked aid truck on a route approved by Israel hit by a rocket?
Well, firstly, Pete, thank you for having me on, and good morning to you and to all of your viewers. Look, this is an absolutely tragic occurrence, and from all sections of society here in Israel, from the president to the prime minister to the defense minister to Daniel Hagari, who's the spokesman for the Israeli Defense Forces, they've all expressed their grief at this terrible occurrence. Something tragic has happened, and we've started an investigation to make sure we find out exactly what's happened. The reason it's so tragic is because we were working so closely with WCK. They've got such an important role in ensuring that aid goes directly to the people that need it most, Gazans that need it most, and not the genocidal terror organization of Hamas. So it's a tragic occurrence. We're going to get to the bottom of what's happened, but there is a palpable sense of grief here in Israel about this occurrence. We must make sure that this never happens again.
Yeah, so that route was approved by Israel, though. So back to the question, you knew the truck was there, you knew it was an aid truck. Why was it hit?
Well, the way we're treating this right now is a friendly fire example, because that's exactly how we feel. We're going to investigate precisely what happens. Look, it's a war. It's a tragic war. It's not a war that we wanted or...
Okay, thanks.
Wow.
Yeah, a friendly fire occurrence is what he called it. So, I mean, I think that is a really telling turn of phrase, because he's stating that we, as the Israelis, consider World Central Kitchen to be part of our allied forces. And it's not unusual for the Israelis to kill their own in a sense. So it's they're kind of saying it in their own words there.
Yeah. I expect that this story has more legs, and we will be learning much more about World Central Kitchen and its various relationships with the people in charge of the genocide. But
I just want to make one more point about this, because there is this impulse that people have that is natural. We all feel it. People want to help. So they say, well, who can I donate to? Well, the point is, there are great organizations, but we can't individually donate our way out of this famine, this starvation in Gaza. This is being done deliberately. And what is needed is maximum political pressure from people on their governments to end the effort, the US-led effort, the US-Israeli effort to destroy UNRWA. UNRWA is the only agency that has been there for 75 years, that has the infrastructure and the expertise to provide basic services, food, humanitarian needs, not to a few thousand people here and there, not to one part of Gaza, but to the entire territory and to the entire population. And they are deliberately being prevented from doing that by the United States and Israel for political genocidal reasons. We cannot lose focus on that.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you so much, Ali, Asa, John, for this discussion. We're over 3 hours, so I think we're going to try and wrap up. But first, Asa, do you want to go to some of the comments?
Yep.
from our audience.
As always, people are watching from all over the world. There always seems to be at least one person from Wales, Mexico City, Beirut, Canada, Ireland, Austria, Sweden, India, London, and many more. And there was an absolute outpouring of support for Abubaker. It was a very emotional time in the chat. Yeah. There was so many comments I could have chosen, but this one sort of summed it up well. I'm blubbering right now, so that was a lot of people were saying that it was very emotional. Thank you, thank you everyone for your support, and thank you, Abubaker Abed. We thank you. It was yeah. Thank you for coming on and being able to come on. Thank you everyone who commented. There were so many great comments, and we've run out of time.
Yeah, thank you as always. And let's just take a quick look at the front page of the Electronic Intifada. Make sure that you go to electronicintifada.net, read not only Abubaker's latest feature, but we have extraordinary and very crucial features right now up on the front page there by contributors in Gaza. And then there on the right-hand side of the page, all of our news posts over the last few days. And then go to that little box down there at the bottom, or then up at the very top, sorry, there we go, to sign up for our email list. If you haven't already, you can also sign up there at the Get Updates link at the very top. It's the best way for us to keep in touch with you. Of course, go to our YouTube page, subscribe to this channel. You will get notified for the next live streams, as well as these standalone podcast episodes that we've also been doing. With that, I think that's it. Anybody have anything else? Did I forget anything? Thank you as always to Tamara, of course. The incredible direction and production that she brings every week to this broadcast is just it's unsurpassed. So thank you, Tamara. Thank you to all of our EI colleagues: Maureen Murphy, Dave Cronin, Michael Brown, Omar Ashtawy, Leah Caldwell. Am I forgetting anybody? And then the rest of us. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.